Welcome to NightSleepWhisper. Tonight, I'm taking you away from the noise of the daily world and into the ancient Viking village of Kattegat, a place of icy seas and flickering torches. Together, we will uncover the mystery of the Golden Axe, a relic that holds the fate of Erik and Elara. This massive 50-chapter saga is here to guide you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Now, lean back, close your eyes, and let the whispers carry you to the mysterious lands of the north. Our journey begins now. The village of Kattegat was very cold in the morning. Grey smoke rose from the chimneys of the wooden houses. The ocean was quiet, and the big Viking ships sat on the dark sand. Erik stood outside the great hall. He was a tall man with long blonde hair and a thick beard. He was a brave warrior and a loyal friend to the village leader. He wore a heavy coat made of brown animal skin to stay warm. Erik looked at the mountains. They were covered in bright white snow. Today was an important day for the people of Kattegat. The village was ready for a big feast to celebrate a successful year. Inside the great hall, men and women worked hard. They moved large wooden tables into long rows. They put candles on the walls to provide light. In the center of the room, a large fire burned. The orange flames gave heat to everyone. The air smelled like dry wood and roasted meat. Erik walked into the hall. The floor was made of hard dirt and stones. He saw Jarl Sigurd sitting on a large wooden chair at the end of the room. The Jarl was an old man, but he was still very strong. He had many scars on his arms from old battles. Next to the Jarl was a special wooden chest. This chest stayed near the Jarl at all times. Inside the chest was the Golden Axe. It was the most famous weapon in the land. It was made of heavy gold and very sharp steel. "Good morning, Erik," Jarl Sigurd said. His voice was deep and calm. "Good morning, Jarl," Erik replied. He bowed his head to show respect. "The village is ready for the feast tonight." The Jarl nodded slowly. He looked happy, but his eyes were also tired. "The Golden Axe is the symbol of our power. As long as we have it, Kattegat is safe and strong." Erik looked at the chest. He felt proud to protect his home and his leader. He walked to the back of the hall to check the heavy wooden doors. He liked everything to be perfect. He met another man named Bjorn near the kitchen. Bjorn was a strong man with big arms and messy hair. He was the village blacksmith. Bjorn was moving a heavy barrel of ale. "Are you ready for the party, Erik?" Bjorn asked. He stopped and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yes," Erik said. "But we must stay alert. Many people want our gold." Bjorn laughed. "Nobody is brave enough to steal from Jarl Sigurd. The guards are everywhere." Erik smiled, but he felt a strange feeling in his stomach. He looked around the room. The great hall was full of long shadows. The wind moved the doors slowly. Erik checked the lock on the back door. It was strong and made of thick iron. He walked back to the center of the hall. The light from the fire danced on the walls. Everything looked normal. But Erik was a careful man. He noticed small things. He saw a small window high up in the wall. It was open a little bit. That was strange. Usually, the windows were closed to keep the heat inside. Erik decided to watch the hall closely. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The light came through the small windows of the great hall. Many warriors and workers were now inside. The room was loud with the sound of people talking and wooden plates hitting the tables. Erik stood near the fire. He watched the people carefully. He still felt a little worried about the open window he saw earlier. It was a small detail, but Erik did not like small mistakes. Jarl Sigurd stood up from his big wooden chair. He wanted to look at the Golden Axe. It was a tradition to clean the axe and show it to the warriors before the feast began. The Jarl took a heavy iron key from his leather belt. He walked to the wooden chest. The chest was beautiful, with pictures of dragons carved into the dark wood. The Jarl put the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The lock opened. The Jarl lifted the heavy lid of the chest. He stopped moving suddenly. He did not speak. His face turned very red, and then it turned very pale. He looked into the chest for a long time. Erik saw the Jarl's hands shake. Erik walked quickly to the leader's side. He looked inside the chest too. The soft red cloth was still there, but the golden axe was gone. The chest was completely empty. "It is gone," the Jarl shouted. His voice was loud and angry. The busy talking in the hall stopped instantly. Every person stood still. The only sound in the room was the low burning of the logs in the fire. The Jarl looked at his guards with fire in his eyes. Who was here? Who touched this chest? This is an insult to our ancestors. Erik knelt down by the chest. He did not want to panic. He looked at the lock very closely. It did not look broken. There were no marks from a hammer or a knife. The thief had a key, or the thief was very good with metal tools. Erik looked at the floor around the chest. Most people stayed far away from the Jarl's seat, but he saw many footprints in the dirt. Bjorn the blacksmith was standing a few meters away. He looked very surprised. His mouth was open, and he dropped a wooden spoon on the floor. Bjorn looked at the Jarl and then at Erik. He looked nervous. But many people were nervous when the Jarl was angry. The Jarl turned to Erik and put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Erik, you are my most trusted warrior. You must find my axe. If we do not have the axe for the ceremony tonight, the people will think I am a weak leader. We cannot have a feast without the symbol of our power." Erik felt the weight of the task. He looked around the room at the faces of the villagers. Friends, neighbors, and warriors were all looking at each other with suspicion. Erik knew this was not a simple accident. Someone in this room was a thief. He needed to find a clue before the sun went down. He looked again at the empty red cloth inside the chest. The mystery had begun. Erik walked out of the great hall into the cold morning air. The village of Kattegat was no longer quiet. People stood in small groups. They whispered to each other. The news of the missing axe was spreading fast. Erik did not stop to talk to anyone. He had a job to do. He walked down the muddy path toward the edge of the village. He stopped at a large building made of thick wood and stone. This was the forge, the workshop of Bjorn the blacksmith. A large fire burned inside the forge. The heat was very strong, even from the doorway. Erik heard the rhythmic sound of a heavy hammer hitting metal. It was a loud, ringing noise that echoed through the street. Erik stepped inside. The air was thick with grey smoke and the smell of hot iron. Bjorn was standing by a large stone table. He held a piece of glowing red metal with long iron tongs. He hit the metal hard with his hammer. "Bjorn," Erik said loudly. The blacksmith did not hear him. He hit the metal again. Sparks flew into the air like tiny orange stars. Erik walked closer and put his hand on Bjorn's arm. Bjorn jumped. He dropped his hammer on the dirt floor. Bjorn looked at Erik. His face was covered in black soot and sweat. His eyes were wide. "Erik, you scared me," Bjorn said. He picked up his hammer and put it on the table. "Why are you here? Should you not be with the Jarl?" "The Jarl is angry, Bjorn," Erik replied. He looked around the workshop. There were swords, shields, and tools everywhere. "He wants his axe. You were in the great hall this morning. You were near the chest." Bjorn wiped his face with a dirty cloth. He did not look Erik in the eye. "I was only there to deliver some new knives for the kitchen. I did not touch the chest. I am a simple blacksmith, not a thief." Erik moved slowly around the forge. He looked at the different tools. "You are the best metalworker in the village. Bjorn, you know every lock and every key in Kattegat. If someone wanted to open that chest without breaking it, they would need your help. Bjorn shook his head quickly. No, Erik. I am loyal to Sigurd. He gives me work. Why would I steal from him? It is a crime. I would lose my hands or my life. Erik saw something on the floor near Bjorn's boots. It was a small, thin piece of metal. It looked like a tool for opening locks. Erik pointed to it. What is that? Bjorn quickly covered the metal piece with his boot. He looked even more nervous now. It is nothing. Just a broken piece of a needle. I was fixing a leather belt for a traveler. Erik did not believe him. But he did not arrest him yet. He needed more proof. A traveler. Which traveler? A woman. Bjorn said. She arrived yesterday. She has dark hair and a long blue cloak. She stays at the small inn by the docks. Erik remembered the blue feather he had seen earlier. He felt a spark of hope. Thank you, Bjorn. Stay in your shop today. Do not leave the village. Erik walked out of the forge. He left the heat behind and stepped back into the cold. He had a new lead. He needed to find the woman in the blue cloak. Erik walked back to the great hall. The big room was quieter now. Most of the workers were outside or in the kitchens. 2 guards stood by the heavy front doors. They looked serious. They held their long spears tightly. Erik nodded to them and went inside. The fire in the center was now small. It produced a soft, warm light and a little bit of smoke. Erik went to the Jarl's high chair. The empty chest sat there like a sad ghost. He knelt on the cold ground. He wanted to look at everything one more time. He moved his hands across the dirt and the stones of the floor. Near the back of the chest, in a dark corner, he saw something. It was small and soft. He picked it up. It was a feather. It was not a brown feather from a chicken or a grey feather from a bird in the village. This feather was a bright, deep blue. It was the color of the ocean on a clear day. Erik held it up to the light of a candle. It was very clean. It did not belong in a dusty great hall. He remembered what Bjorn the blacksmith said. The traveler woman wore a blue cloak. Erik felt a chill that was not from the wind. Was she the thief? Or did she work with someone inside the village? He put the blue feather into a small leather bag on his belt. It was his first piece of real evidence. Then, Erik looked up at the high window again. It was still open a few inches. He found a tall wooden ladder in the corner of the hall. He carried the ladder to the wall and climbed up. The wood of the ladder felt rough and cold in his hands. When he reached the top, he looked at the window frame. There was a new mark on the wood. It was a deep scratch. It looked like a metal hook or a heavy tool hit the frame. Erik touched the scratch with his thumb. The wood inside the scratch was still light in color. This meant the scratch was fresh. Someone entered or left through this window very recently. The window was very high. A person needed to be very strong or have a rope to climb this wall. Erik looked out of the window. From here, he could see the roofs of the village and the cold sea. He imagined a thief climbing silently in the dark. Erik climbed down the ladder carefully. He put the ladder back in its place. He had 2 clues now. He had a blue feather and a fresh scratch on the window. He also had a suspect. He felt a sense of urgency. The sun was moving across the sky. He did not have much time before the feast began. He walked out of the hall and headed toward the docks. He needed to find the woman in the blue cloak. Erik walked back across the great hall. The air was now cold because the fire was very low. Jarl Sigurd sat in his large chair. He held a silver cup in his hand. But he did not drink. He looked at the floor. His face was hard like stone. When he heard Erik's boots on the floor, he looked up. His eyes were narrow and sharp. "What did you find, Erik?" the Jarl asked. His voice was like a low growl. Erik stood in front of the leader. He reached into his leather bag and pulled out the blue feather. He held it out for the Jarl to see. "I found this near the chest. And I found a scratch on the high window. Someone climbed into the hall." The Jarl took the feather. He looked at it for only a second. Then, he dropped it on the ground. He looked very disappointed. "A feather? You bring me a feather? I am missing the golden axe, and my best warrior brings me a bird's wing. It is a clue, Jarl," Erik said calmly. "It is not a common feather. I think it belongs to a traveler, a woman in a blue cloak." The Jarl stood up suddenly. He was a tall man, and he looked very powerful in the dim light. He slammed his silver cup onto the wooden table. The sound was loud and echoed through the empty hall. "I do not care about cloaks or travelers. I care about our history. Without that axe, our neighbors will think we are weak. They will come with their ships and their swords. They will burn our homes." Erik stayed silent. He knew the Jarl was right. The golden axe was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of their safety. "Listen to me, Erik," Sigurd said. He walked closer to Erik. He smelled like old wood and expensive ale. "I am giving you 3 days. 3 suns must rise and set. If you do not find the axe by the 3rd day, I will have to find a new captain of the guard, and I will have to punish the person who failed to protect my hall." Erik felt a heavy weight in his chest. He was a loyal man, and the Jarl's words hurt him. "I understand, Jarl. I will not sleep until the axe is back in that chest." "Good," the Jarl said. He turned away and looked at the fire. "Go now. The first day is already half over. Do not return to this hall without news of the thief." Erik bowed and walked out. The heavy wooden doors shut behind him. He stood in the cold wind for a moment. He had 72 hours. He looked at the blue feather on the ground near his feet. He picked it up again and cleaned the dust from it. He did not have much time. He turned his back to the great hall and started walking toward the docks. He needed to find the woman in the blue cloak before the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Erik walked through the village toward the outer stone wall. The wind was getting stronger, and the smell of salt from the sea was very heavy. He saw a man sitting on a wooden bench near the main gate. This was Eivor. He was a tall man with grey hair and many old scars on his hands. Usually, Eivor was a very alert guard. He was proud of his job. But today, Eivor looked at the ground. He looked ashamed. Erik stopped in front of him. Eivor did not look up. He held his long spear, but he did not hold it tightly. Erik could see that Eivor's eyes were red and tired. "Eivor," Erik said softly, "I need to talk to you about last night." Eivor finally looked up. He sighed, and a long breath of white mist came from his mouth in the cold air. "I know why you are here, Erik. The Jarl is angry. The axe is gone, and I was the one at the door. Tell me what happened," Erik said. He sat down on the bench next to the old guard. "Did you see anyone enter the hall?" Eivor shook his head slowly. "The night was very dark. I was standing by the big doors. I felt fine at first. But then, my head started to feel very heavy. My legs felt like lead. I tried to stay awake, but I could not. I fell into a deep sleep against the wall." Erik looked at Eivor's water skin hanging from his belt. "Did you drink anything unusual?" "Only my water," Eivor replied. "But wait. Before I fell asleep, I heard a strange noise. It was not a footstep. It was a soft, sliding sound, like a rope moving against stone. I looked toward the high window, but my eyes were too blurry to see. Erik thought about the scratch he found on the window frame. Did you see a shadow? Yvonne nodded slowly. I saw a shadow on the wall. It was tall and thin, but it did not look like a man. It had strange shapes on its shoulders. They looked like wings. I thought I was dreaming because I was so tired. Erik reached into his bag and showed the blue feather to Yvonne. Was the shadow this color? Yvonne looked at the feather. His eyes went wide. I do not know the color, Erik. It was too dark. But the shape was definitely strange. After that, I remember nothing until the sun came up and the other guards woke me. Erik stood up. He felt a mix of pity and suspicion. Did anyone come near you before you felt sleepy? Anyone from the village? Only the healer, Helga. Eva said. She gave me a piece of dried meat. She said I looked hungry. She is a kind woman. She would not hurt me. Erik thanked Eva and stood up. He looked at the high stone wall of the great hall in the distance. The mystery was growing. He had a blue feather, a scratch on a window, and a guard who was drugged with something. He needed to find the woman in the blue cloak, but now he also wanted to talk to Helga the healer. Erik returned to the great hall. The room was empty now. The workers were gone, and the Jarl was in his private room. The large fire was only a pile of red coals. The hall felt different when it was quiet. It felt cold and full of secrets. Erik walked back to the area where the blacksmith, Bjorn, was moving the barrels of ale earlier that morning. He knelt on the floor. He wanted to see if anything else was hidden in the shadows. He crawled under one of the long wooden tables. The floor was covered in old straw and dust. Erik moved the straw with his hands. His fingers touched something hard and flat. It was not a stone and it was not wood. He pulled it out into the light. It was a piece of old leather, folded into a small square. Erik opened it carefully. The leather was thin and yellow. On the inside, there was a drawing made with dark ink. It was a map. Erik studied the drawing. He recognized the shape of the coast and the village of Kattegat. The map showed the path from the village into the great forest. The forest was a dangerous place. It was full of thick trees and wild animals. On the map, there was a small mark in the middle of the woods. It was a circle with a tiny cross inside it. This is not a map for a trader. Erik whispered to himself. This is a map for someone who wants to hide. He looked at the ink. It was fresh. It did not smell like the old ink the Jarl scribes used. It smelled like berries and charcoal. This was a map made by someone who lived in the wild. Erik wondered if the woman in the blue cloak made it. Or perhaps Bjorn the blacksmith was hiding more than just tools. Erik stood up and brushed the dust from his clothes. He felt a new sense of direction. The blue feather, the scratch on the window, and now this map all pointed away from the great hall. The thief did not want to stay in the village. They wanted to go deep into the trees where no one could find them. He looked at the high window again. The light of the afternoon was turning orange. He did not have much time before the first night. He had to decide his next step. Should he go to the inn to find the woman, or should he follow the map into the dark forest? Erik put the map into his bag next to the feather. He decided to trust his warrior instincts. The map was a direct path to the mystery. He walked to the heavy doors and pushed them open. The cold wind hit his face, but he did not feel the chill. He felt the excitement of the hunt. He walked toward the edge of the village, where the tall green trees of the forest began. The forest began where the green grass of the village ended. The trees were very old and very tall. Their branches were thick and reached for the sky like giant fingers. Erik stood at the edge of the woods and looked back at Kattegat. He could see the smoke from the fires and the masts of the longships. Then, He turned and stepped into the shadows. The air inside the forest was different. It was much colder than the village, and the wind did not reach here. It was very quiet. Erik could hear his own breath and the sound of his boots on the dry leaves. He pulled the leather map from his bag. He looked at the drawing and then at the trees. The path starts at the split rock. Erik whispered to himself. He walked for several minutes until he found a large grey stone. The stone was broken in the middle, exactly like the drawing on the map. Erik felt a little better. The map was real. He followed a narrow trail that went deep into the center of the woods. The ground was uneven. There were many tree roots that looked like snakes. Erik was careful not to trip. As he walked, he looked for more clues. He noticed a small piece of blue thread caught on a sharp branch. He stopped and took it. It was the same deep blue as the feather from the Great Hall. The thief was definitely here. They were moving fast, but they were also leaving a trail. The sun started to go down behind the mountains. The light in the forest turned from grey to a dark purple. The shadows became longer and more frightening. Erik put his hand on the handle of his sword. He was a brave man, but he knew the forest was home to many dangers. There were wolves and bears in these trees. Suddenly, he heard a branch break. The noise was loud in the silent woods. Erik stopped instantly. He did not move a muscle. He listened carefully. He did not hear any more noises, but he felt a strange sensation on the back of his neck. He felt like someone was watching him from behind the thick trunks of the pine trees. "Who is there?" Erik called out. His voice was strong, but no one answered. The only response was the cry of an owl in the distance. Erik looked at the map again. The mark with the cross was not far now. He needed to keep moving before it became completely dark. He could not see the path well in the night. He took a deep breath and continued to walk. Every time a bird moved in the trees, Erik looked around. He was the hunter, but he felt like he was also being hunted. The mystery of the golden axe was leading him into the heart of the darkness. The forest was now very dark. Erik could only see a few meters in front of him. He held the map tightly in his hand. The paper felt cold and damp from the night air. According to the drawing, the cross was very close. Erik pushed through some thick bushes and stopped. He reached a small clearing in the middle of the trees. In the center of the clearing stood a small hut. It was a very old building made of dark wood and grey stones. The roof was covered in thick green moss and dry grass. One side of the hut looked like it was falling down. There were no lights in the windows, and no smoke came from the chimney. It looked like no one lived there for many years. Erik moved slowly toward the hut. He did not want to make any noise. He stepped on the soft grass instead of the dry leaves. He kept his hand on the handle of his sword. His heart beat a little faster. He reached the wooden door. The door was small and narrow. It was slightly open. Erik pushed the door with his fingertips. The old wooden door made a sharp, high sound as it opened. Erik waited for a moment, but everything remained silent. He stepped inside. The air inside the hut was heavy and smelled like dust and old rain. There was a small table in the middle of the room and a wooden bed in the corner. Erik looked at the table. To his surprise, it was not empty. He saw a small piece of bread and a wooden cup. He touched the bread. It was not hard or dry. It was soft and fresh. Someone was in this house recently. Perhaps they were still here, hiding in the dark corners of the room. He looked around the floor. Near the bed, he saw a small piece of blue fabric. He picked it up and looked at it closely. It was a perfect match for the blue feather and the blue thread he found earlier. This was the place. The thief used this abandoned hut as a hiding spot. Erik heard a soft movement from the back of the hut. It was the sound of a heavy cloak brushing against the wooden wall. He turned his head quickly. He saw a shadow move behind a large wooden barrel. The shadow was tall and fast. "I know you are there," Erik said. His voice was firm and loud in the small room. "Come out into the light. I am a warrior of Jarl Sigurd, and I am looking for the golden axe." The shadow did not move. Erik took a step forward. He felt a cold wind enter the hut from the open door. Suddenly, the shadow jumped toward a small back window. Erik ran to stop the person, but he was too late. He heard the sound of feet hitting the ground outside. The person was running back into the deep forest. Erik did not hesitate. He ran out of the hut and into the dark night. He could not lose the thief now. Erik ran through the dark trees. The branches hit his face and his arms. The ground was wet and slippery. He could hear the person in front of him. He heard the sound of heavy breathing and feet hitting the soft mud. The thief was fast, but Erik was a trained warrior. He did not stop. He kept his eyes on the moving shadow and the flash of the blue cloak. Suddenly, the forest became very thick. The trees grew close together. Erik had to slow down to move between them. He lost sight of the blue fabric. He stopped and held his breath. He listened for any sound. He heard the wind moving the high branches of the trees. He heard the distant sound of the sea hitting the rocks. But he did not hear the thief anymore. "I know you are close," Erik said. His voice was steady, but he felt a cold chill on his back. He was in a part of the forest he did not know. The trees here were different. They were covered in white fungus that looked like ghosts in the moonlight. The air felt heavy and very cold. Erik turned in a circle. He felt like 100 eyes were looking at him from the darkness. He was no longer the hunter. He felt like the prey. A low voice came from behind a large oak tree. "You are far from your village, warrior." Erik turned quickly. He pulled his sword from its leather sheath. He saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was not the person in the blue cloak. This person was much taller. They stood very still. The moonlight did not reach their face. "Who are you?" Erik asked. He held his sword ready. "Did you steal the Jarl's axe?" The figure did not move. "The axe is a heavy burden for a small village. You should go back to your great hall. Erik, the forest does not want you here." Erik took a step forward. "I am not leaving without the axe. I have a duty to my Jarl." The figure laughed softly. It was a cold, dry sound. Duty is a dangerous thing. It leads men to their graves. Suddenly, several more shadows appeared from behind the trees. They did not have swords, but they held long wooden bows. Erik saw the white tips of arrows pointed at his chest. He was alone in the dark, surrounded by strangers. He realized he had walked into a trap. These people were not simple thieves. They were organized, and they were waiting for him. Erik did not move. He knew he could not fight 5 archers at once. He lowered his sword just a little bit. He needed to think. He needed to find a way to escape and tell the Jarl what he found. The mystery of the golden axe was much bigger than one thief in a blue cloak. It was a conspiracy. Erik stood very still. The arrows were sharp and white in the moonlight. He did not want to die in this dark forest. The tall man who spoke earlier stepped back into the shadows. From behind a thick pine tree, a woman walked into the small circle of light. She was wearing a long, heavy cloak. It was the color of the deep sea. Erik saw the blue feathers sewn around the neck. This was the woman from the village. This was the person the blacksmith, Bjorn, mentioned. She was tall and had long, dark hair. Her face was pale, and her eyes were bright and clever. She did not look like a common thief. She looked like a queen from a faraway land. "Put your sword down, Erik of Kattegat," she said. Her voice was calm and smooth. "You know my name," Erik said. He did not put his sword away yet. He held the handle tightly. "How do you know me? Why are you in these woods?" "Everyone knows the captain of the guard," she replied. She walked closer to him. She was not afraid of his weapon. "My name is Astrid. I am a traveler, just as your friend the blacksmith told you. I see things and I hear things." "Where is the golden axe, Astrid?" Erik asked. He looked her in the eyes. "The Jarl wants it back. He is a very angry man right now. If you give it to me, I can help you. Maybe he will be kind." Astrid smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Jarl Sigurd is never kind, Erik. He only cares about power and gold. The golden axe is a beautiful weapon, but it is also a lie. It does not bring peace to your people. It only brings more battles." Erik looked at the archers in the shadows. They did not move. They looked like statues made of wood and stone. "You were in the Great Hall. I found your feather near the chest. I found your map under the table. You climbed the wall and took the axe." Astrid nodded slowly. "I was in the hall. Yes. That is true. But the world is more complicated than you think. Warrior, I did not take the axe because I want to be rich. I took it because the history of this land is changing. There are secrets in Kattegat that you do not know." Erik was confused. He was a loyal man. He believed in simple things like duty and strength. "I do not care about your secrets. My Jarl gave me a task. Give me the axe, and this can end peacefully." "I cannot do that," Astrid said. She waved her hand, and the archers lowered their bows. "But I will not kill you tonight. You are a brave man, and you are honest. That is rare in your village." She turned to her men. "Take his sword. We are going to the camp. Erik needs to see the truth." Two strong men walked toward Erik. He looked at the archers and then at Astrid. He was one man against many. He knew he could not win a fight here. He let the men take his heavy sword. He needed to stay alive to find the truth. He followed Astrid deeper into the cold, dark woods. Erik walked behind Astrid. The forest was very quiet now. The two men with bows walked behind him. Erik did not have his sword, and his hands were empty. He felt a little bit of shame, but he remained calm. He watched Astrid closely. She walked with confidence. She knew these woods very well. The moonlight hit her back. Erik looked at her cloak again. It was a beautiful, deep blue color. It was much nicer than the clothes in Kattegat. He saw the blue feathers. They were soft and long. They were sewn onto the fabric with very thin, shiny gold thread. This was the work of a master. It was not something a simple traveler would own. Erik realized that Astrid was not a poor wanderer. She came from a place with great wealth. "Those feathers," Erik said. "They are not from our birds." Astrid did not turn around. She kept walking over the old tree roots. "You are right, Erik. They come from a bird in the south. It is a warm place with many bright colors. It is very far from the ice and snow of your village." "Why did you leave a feather in the Great Hall?" Erik asked. "You are very careful. A mistake like that is strange for someone like you. You climbed a high wall and opened a heavy chest. You do not seem like a person who makes mistakes." Astrid stopped. She turned and looked at him. A small smile appeared on her face, but her eyes were still sharp. "Maybe it was not a mistake. Maybe I wanted the best warrior of Kattegat to find me. Maybe I wanted to see if anyone in that village was still smart enough to follow a trail." They reached a small clearing. In the middle, a small fire burned. It was not a large, bright fire like the one in the Great Hall. It was small and hidden between 3 large rocks to hide the light. 3 men sat around the fire. They wore dark clothes and carried short swords. They did not look like Vikings. Their hair was cut short, and they had different patterns on their leather armor. They looked like professional soldiers from a different land. "Is this your army?" Erik asked. He looked at the men. They were strong, but there were only a few of them. "We are not an army," Astrid replied. She sat down on a flat stone near the fire. She moved her blue cloak to the side. "We are messengers. We are here to bring a message to Jarl Sigurd. But he does not like to listen to people from the south. He only likes to listen to the sound of his own voice." Erik sat down across from her. He felt the warmth of the fire on his cold face. It felt good after the long walk in the dark. "He is our leader. He protects our people from our enemies." "Does he?" Astrid asked. She looked into the flames. "Ask him about the taxes he takes. Ask him about the silver he sends to the kings in the west. He is not the man you think he is. Erik, you are a loyal guard, but you are guarding a man who has many secrets." Erik looked into the fire. He thought about the Jarl's tired eyes and his angry voice. He thought about the empty chest. He wanted to believe his leader was a hero. But here, in the dark woods with this mysterious woman, the truth felt very far away. He looked at the blue cloak again. It was a beautiful thing, but it represented a world he did not understand. Erik moved slowly. He stayed in the shadows. He used the large rocks to hide his body. He was a trained warrior, so he knew how to move without making a noise. He followed the blue cloak. The blue color was hard to see in the dark, but it caught the moonlight sometimes. He was careful not to step on dry branches. He walked for 10 minutes. The air began to change. It felt more humid and smelled like wet earth. He heard a loud, continuous noise in the distance. It was the sound of a river. The water was moving fast over big stones and falling into small pools. Erik stopped behind a large oak tree. He saw Astrid standing on the bank of the river. She was not alone. A man was waiting for her. He was very big, even bigger than Erik. He had a long black beard and wore heavy furs. He looked like a warrior from the north. The man had a large sword on his back. Erik stayed very still. He did not want them to see him. He watched as the man and Astrid stood close together. Astrid and the man started to talk. Erik could not hear everything because the rushing water was very loud. He moved a little closer. He crawled on his stomach through the wet grass. He reached a thick bush near the riverbank. Now he could hear their voices over the sound of the river. "Did you get it?" the man asked. His voice was deep and rough. "I have the axe," Astrid said. "But it is not enough. We need the other part." The man looked angry. He hit a tree with his hand. The man looked angry. "The Jarl is looking for it. His best warrior is in the woods right now. He will find us." "I know," Astrid said. She looked back toward the direction of the camp. "He is with my men. He is a loyal man. But he is in our way. He does not understand what is happening in Kattegat. We need the key, Astrid," the man said. He leaned closer to her. "Without the key, the axe is just a piece of metal. The treasure stays hidden forever. We did not come all this way for a simple weapon." Erik's heart beat fast in his chest. A key. A treasure. This was more than a simple theft of a symbol. He watched them carefully. The man reached into a leather pouch on his belt. He showed Astrid something small, but Erik could not see what it was. They looked at it together. Erik wanted to see the object, but the shadows were too dark. Suddenly, a bird flew out of the bush next to Erik. Astrid and the man stopped talking instantly. They turned their heads and looked toward the bush. Erik held his breath. He did not move a muscle. He hoped the darkness was deep enough to hide him from their sharp eyes. Erik stayed very still behind the thick bush. His heart was loud in his ears. Astrid and the man looked at the dark trees for a long time. The man touched the handle of his large sword. Erik did not move. Finally, the man turned back to Astrid. He seemed less worried now. It was just a bird. Rollo, Astrid said. Her voice was calm again. Do not be so nervous. You are a giant of a man, but you are afraid of the dark. So, the man's name was Rollo. Erik remembered that name. Rollo was a famous warrior from a village far to the north. He was known for his strength and his bad temper. Erik wondered why a man like Rollo was working with a mysterious woman like Astrid. I am not afraid, Rollo said. He crossed his arms over his heavy fur coat. I'm just tired of waiting. We have the golden axe. Why are we still in these cold woods? We should leave now. We can sell the gold and live like kings in the south. Astrid shook her head. She looked at the fast river. You are a fool, Rollo. The axe is not just gold. It is a symbol, but it is also a container. There is a secret inside the handle of the axe, but we cannot open it without the iron key. Rollo spat on the ground. He looked very angry. The key. Always the key. We looked everywhere in the great hall. It was not in the chest. It was not on the Jarl's belt. Where is it? The Jarl is smart, Astrid replied. He knows the axe is dangerous without the key. He hid the key somewhere else in the village. Maybe he gave it to someone he trusts. Erik felt a shock. He thought about the Jarl. Did the Jarl have a secret key? Erik worked for the Jarl for many years, but he never saw a special iron key. He only saw the key to the chest. He listened more closely. If we do not find the key soon, Rollo said, the other leaders will arrive. They want the treasure too. If they find us without the key, they will kill us and take the axe for themselves. I have a plan, Astrid said. She stepped closer to Rollo and whispered something. Erik could not hear her now. She was being very quiet. Rollo listened and then he laughed. It was a dark and mean laugh. That is a good plan, Rollo said. The blacksmith will help us. He has no choice. Erik felt a cold feeling in his stomach. Bjorn the blacksmith. Erik knew Bjorn was hiding something. Now he knew Bjorn was part of this secret group. Erik wanted to run back to the village to stop them, but he had to wait. Astrid and Rollo started to walk away from the river. They walked toward the mountains, away from the camp where the other men were. Erik waited until they were far away. He stood up slowly. His legs were stiff and cold. He looked at the ground where they were standing. He saw something dark in the mud. He walked to the spot and knelt down. The moon was very bright over the moving water. Erik knelt in the dark mud by the river. He reached down and touched something hard. It felt cold against his skin. He pulled it out of the wet earth. He used his sleeve to wipe the black mud away. In the palm of his hand sat a small iron key. It was old and heavy. It had strange marks carved into the metal. This is it, Erik whispered. The iron key. He looked in the direction where Astrid and Rollo went. They were walking toward the mountains. They did not know they dropped it. This key was very important. Astrid said they needed it to open the secret inside the golden axe. Without this key, the axe was just a beautiful weapon made of gold. With this key, there was a treasure. Erik felt a mix of fear and excitement. He was just one man. He did not have his sword. He was in the middle of a dark forest with enemies all around him. But now he had the biggest clue of all. He had to get back to the village. He had to find the axe and use this key to see the truth. He put the iron key into the small leather bag on his belt. He made sure the bag was closed tightly. He did not want to lose it in the grass. He looked back toward the small camp where the guards were. The fire was still burning, but it was very low. The guards were probably tired. They did not think their prisoner was smart enough to escape and follow their leader. Erik moved like a ghost through the trees. He stayed away from the path. He used the tall pine trees to hide his body. He was very careful where he put his feet. He did not want to break a branch or make a loud noise. The forest was very quiet. The only sound was the distant noise of the river and the wind in the high leaves. He saw the orange glow of the campfire through the branches. One guard was sitting up, but his head was moving down. He was falling asleep. Erik stayed in the deep shadows and walked in a large circle around the camp. He reached the area where he first met Astrid. From there, he knew the way back to the village. He started to walk faster. The air was very cold now, and his breath made small white clouds in the night. He thought about Bjorn the blacksmith. If Bjorn was working with Astrid and Rollo, the village was in danger. Who else was part of this plan? Was the Jarl safe? Erik did not stop to rest. He followed the stars in the sky. He knew the North Star always pointed toward the mountains behind Kattegat. He walked through the thick bushes and over the old tree roots. His legs were tired, and his arms were scratched by the branches. But he did not care. He had the key. He had a chance to save his home. As the sky started to turn a light gray, Erik reached the edge of the forest. He saw the wooden walls of Kattegat and the smoke from the morning fires. He was back, but the mystery was only getting bigger. The sky was a pale, cold blue when Erik reached the wooden gates of Kattegat. The sun was not yet visible, but the light was strong enough to see the shapes of the houses. Erik did not go to the main entrance. He knew the guards would ask him many questions. He did not want to explain why he lost his sword or where he was all night. He moved to a small opening in the wall near the docks and slipped inside quietly. The village was starting to wake up. He heard the sound of a heavy wooden bucket hitting the side of a stone well. He heard the low voices of men talking as they prepared the fishing boats. Erik stayed close to the shadows of the buildings. He pulled his cloak tight to hide his face. His legs were heavy and his feet were sore, but he did not stop. He had the iron key in his bag, and it felt like it was burning against his side. He reached the forge. The large building was quiet. No smoke was coming from the chimney yet. This was good. It meant Bjorn was probably still asleep or at the Great Hall. Erik walked to the back of the workshop. He found a small window that was held shut with a simple wooden latch. He used his small knife to lift the latch and climbed inside. The forge was cold and smelled of old ash. Erik looked around the dark room. He saw the large anvil and the heavy hammers. He remembered what Astrid said. She said the blacksmith would help them. Erik began to search the corners of the room. He moved piles of coal and heavy iron bars. He was looking for something that a small iron key could open. He found nothing near the fire. He moved to the back of the shop where Bjorn kept his finished tools. There was a large wooden shelf full of axes and spearheads. Erik looked behind the shelf. He saw a small door in the floor. It was covered with a dirty rug. He moved the rug and saw a heavy iron ring. He pulled the ring, and a small part of the floor opened. Inside the hole was a small wooden box. It was not a beautiful box like the Jarl's chest. It was plain and strong, made of dark oak. Erik lifted the box out and put it on the workbench. In the center of the box was a small keyhole. Erik's heart began to beat very fast. He reached into his bag and pulled out the iron key he found by the river. The key was covered in dry mud. He cleaned it with his fingers. He put the key into the hole. It fit perfectly. He turned the key slowly. The lock opened. Erik lifted the lid and looked inside. He expected to see gold or maybe the secret Astrid mentioned. Instead, he saw a piece of white silk. Under the silk was something heavy and round. He picked it up. It was a silver ring. But it was not a Viking ring. It had the mark of a lion on it. Erik knew this mark. It belonged to the king of the south, a man who lived many weeks away by boat. Why did the village blacksmith have a royal ring from a foreign land? Erik held the silver ring in his hand. The lion mark was very clear. It was a symbol of a king from a warm, distant land. Why was it here in a cold Viking forge? He heard a heavy sound outside the door. It was the sound of leather boots hitting the frozen ground. Erik quickly put the ring back into the wooden box. He closed the lid and pushed the box back into the hole in the floor. He moved the dirty rug over the opening and stood up. The heavy wooden door of the forge opened. Bjorn the blacksmith walked inside. He did not see Erik at first. He walked to the fire and looked at the cold coals. He looked very tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were shaking. He wiped his face with a cloth, but his hand moved nervously. He looked like a man who did not sleep at all. "The fire is dead, Bjorn," Erik said quietly. Bjorn jumped. He turned around fast and almost fell over a pile of iron bars. When he saw Erik, his face turned white. He gripped the edge of his stone table so hard his knuckles became white. "Erik, what are you doing here?" Bjorn asked. His voice was high and thin. "The forge is closed. I'm not working yet. I'm looking for the axe, Bjorn," Erik said. He walked closer to the blacksmith. He watched Bjorn's eyes. They kept moving to the rug on the floor. "You look worried. Are you afraid of something?" Bjorn shook his head quickly. "No. I am just tired. The Jarl is angry at everyone. It is a bad time for the village." Erik looked at the tools on the table. He saw a small hammer and a very thin file. These were not tools for making horseshoes or big swords. These were tools for delicate work. "I saw Astrid last night, Bjorn. She mentioned your name. She said you are helping them." Bjorn's mouth opened, but no words came out. He began to sweat, even though the room was cold. He looked at the door and then back at Erik. "I had no choice. Erik. They are dangerous people. They told me they would burn my shop if I did not help them." "Help them with what?" Erik asked. He took a step forward. He was much taller than the blacksmith, and he used his size to look powerful. "The key. The axe. Tell me the truth." Bjorn looked at the floor. He started to cry a little. It was strange to see a strong man like Bjorn so broken. "They wanted a copy of the Jarl's key. They brought me a piece of soft wax with the shape of the key. I made a new one from iron. But I did not know they wanted to steal the golden axe. I thought it was for a joke." "You are a liar, Bjorn," Erik said. "The silver ring in the floor is not a joke. You are working for the king of the south." Bjorn gasped. He looked at the rug and realized Erik found his secret spot. He fell to his knees. "Please, Erik, do not tell the Jarl. They have my brother. They took him 2 months ago. They said if I help them get the treasure inside the axe, they will let him go." Erik felt a little pity for the man, but he was still the captain of the guard. "Where is the axe now?" "I don't know," Bjorn cried. "Astrid and Rollo have it. They are waiting for the sun to reach the highest point. They are going to meet someone at the old stone circle." Erik stood over Bjorn. The blacksmith was still on his knees. The floor was covered in grey dust and small pieces of metal. Erik looked at the iron key in his hand. He knew the silver ring he saw earlier was a big clue, but he felt that the mystery was deeper. Bjorn was shaking, and his eyes kept moving toward a corner of the workshop. "Is there something else, Bjorn?" Erik asked. His voice was like a cold wind. "Tell me everything. If you lie to me again, I cannot protect you from the Jarl." Bjorn wiped his eyes with his dirty hands. He stood up slowly. He walked to a large wooden beam that held up the roof of the forge. He reached into a small hole in the wood and pulled out a heavy object. It was wrapped in a piece of dark, oily leather. He walked back to the workbench and put it down. "This is the box Astrid wanted," Bjorn whispered. "She told me to keep it safe until the meeting at the stone circle. She said it was more important than the axe itself." Erik unwrapped the leather. Inside was a small box made of solid black iron. It was not like the wooden chest in the great hall. This box was cold and very smooth. There were no dragons or animals carved into it. Instead, there was a single mark on the top. It was the shape of a sun with a hole in the middle. Erik looked at the lock on the front of the iron box. It was a strange shape. He took the iron key from his bag. He held it next to the lock. The marks on the key matched the marks on the box perfectly. This was the locked box that Astrid and Rollo were talking about by the river. "Open it," Bjorn said. He stepped back, as if he was afraid the box might explode. "I have never seen inside. I was too scared to try." Erik put the key into the hole. It moved easily. He felt the heavy internal parts of the lock slide to the side. There was no sound of a click, but he felt the lid become loose. He lifted the lid slowly. He expected to see a map or a secret letter. Instead, he saw a dark red cushion made of soft wool. In the center of the cushion, there was a space for a ring. Erik realized that the silver ring he found earlier belonged here. He pulled the silver ring with the lion mark from his pocket. He looked at the box and then at the ring. Erik felt a sense of danger. This box was not made by Vikings. The metal was too perfect, and the design was too strange. He realized that Bjorn was not just helping a thief. He was helping people from a different world hide something very powerful. Erik looked at the blacksmith. "The meeting at the stone circle," Erik said. "When is it?" "At noon," Bjorn replied. He looked at the small window. The light was growing brighter. "When the sun is at its highest point. You must be careful, Erik. Rollo is a giant, and he is not alone." Erik closed the box. He had the key, the box, and the ring. He had the evidence he needed, but he still did not have the golden axe. He knew he had to go to the stone circle. Erik held the silver ring between his thumb and finger. The light from the small window hit the metal. The lion on the ring was very detailed. It had tiny green stones for eyes. These stones looked like pieces of the forest or the deep sea. This was not the work of a village blacksmith. It was the work of a master jeweler from a royal city. Erik felt the weight of it. It was heavy and solid. "The lion is the symbol of the king of the south," Erik said. He looked at Bjorn. "Why does a king from a warm land care about a Viking axe?" Bjorn wiped his forehead. He was still very nervous. "It is not just about the axe, Erik. The stories say the king of the south sent a great treasure to the north many years ago. It was a gift of peace, but the ship sank in a storm. Only the golden axe was saved." Erik looked at the iron box on the workbench. "And this ring? What does it have to do with the axe?" "The axe is the container," Bjorn explained. His voice was shaking. "There is a secret space inside the handle of the golden axe, but you cannot open it with your hands. You need the iron key to reach the lock, and you need the silver ring to turn the mechanism. They are two parts of the same puzzle. Erik finally understood. The golden axe was not just a symbol of power for Kattegat. It was a safe. It held something very valuable from the southern kingdoms. Jarl Sigurd probably knew this. Perhaps that was why he was so protective of the weapon. If the ring and the key were used together, the secret of the axe would be revealed. I need to take this, Erik said. He put the silver ring into the black iron box. He closed the lid and heard the heavy metal parts move into place. He wrapped the box back in the oily leather. Bjorn, you must stay here. If the Jarl's guards come, tell them you are working on the kitchen knives. What about the meeting at the stone circle? Bjorn asked. Rollo will kill me if I do not bring the box. I will go in your place, Erik said. He did not have a sword, but he felt strong. He had the key, the ring, and the box. He had the power now. The sun is moving. I must go before the shadows disappear. Erik tucked the heavy package under his arm. He looked out the small window of the forge. The village was now full of people. He saw the Jarl's guards walking near the great hall. He needed to be a shadow. He could not let anyone see the black box. He stepped out of the back door of the forge and moved quickly toward the hills. The stone circle was a place of old spirits and grey rocks. It was the perfect place for a dangerous meeting. Erik climbed the high green hill behind the village. The wind was much colder here, and it pulled at his heavy cloak. Under his arm, he felt the hard shape of the iron box. He was walking toward the stone circle, but he stopped for a moment at a place called the King's Grave. It was a large pile of grey stones where a famous leader from the past was buried. An old man sat on a rock near the grave. His name was Olaf. He was once a great navigator, but now his eyes were cloudy and his hair was as white as the mountain snow. Olaf knew every story and every secret of the north. He spent his days watching the sea and talking to the birds. You are carrying something heavy, Erik, Olaf said. He did not turn his head, but he seemed to know Erik was there. Erik walked closer. He felt respect for the old man. I am carrying the weight of a mystery. Olaf, I found a silver ring with a lion mark. Bjorn the blacksmith said it belongs to a king from the south. Olaf laughed, but it was a sad, quiet sound. He turned his head and looked at Erik with his pale eyes. The blacksmith is a young man. He only knows the stories of today. That ring is much older than the southern kings. Erik opened the leather wrap and showed the mark on the iron box to Olaf. The blacksmith said this ring and the golden axe are connected. Olaf touched the cold iron of the box with a shaking hand. He sighed deeply. Long ago, before Jarl Sigurd was our leader, there were two brothers. Sigurd was the younger brother. The older brother was Harald. Harald was the true owner of the golden axe. He was a fair man, and the people loved him. Erik was surprised. He never heard about a brother. What happened to Harald? There was a great battle, Olaf said. He looked at the distant ocean. Harald wore that silver ring. It was a gift from his wife's family. During the battle, Harald disappeared. People said he died in the waves. Sigurd became the Jarl that day. He took the golden axe and said it was his right to lead. So the ring belongs to Jarl Harald? Erik asked. He looked at the lion mark again, but the blacksmith said it was from the south. Harald's wife was a princess from a southern land. Olaf explained. The lion was her family's sign. Sigurd told everyone the ring was lost at sea. He wanted people to forget Harald. If that ring is back in Kattegat, it means the past is returning. It means Sigurd's power is built on a lie. Erik felt a cold shiver. He thought Jarl Sigurd was a hero. Now he realized the Jarl was a man with a dark secret. The rival leader mentioned in the stories was his own brother. If Astrid and Rollo had the axe and the ring, they could prove that Sigurd was not the rightful leader. The stone circle. Erik whispered. They are meeting there to reveal the truth. Be careful, Erik. Olaf warned. A man who kills for a throne will kill to keep it. Sigurd will not let that ring reach the village. Erik thanked the old man and started running. The sun was almost at its highest point. He had to reach the stone circle. He had to decide if he was a guard for the Jarl or a guard for the truth. Erik ran along the ridge of the hill. His breath was fast, and the cold air hurt his chest. He held the iron box tightly against his side. Below him, the stone circle sat on a flat piece of land. The stones were very old and grey. They looked like giants standing in a ring. Erik did not go down yet. He hid behind a large rock to watch. He thought about what Olaf told him. If Sigurd was not the true leader, then everything Erik believed was a lie. But he also thought about how Astrid knew exactly when the guards were tired. She knew about the secret key and the hidden ring. She had help from someone inside the village. Bjorn the blacksmith was one person, but Bjorn was too afraid to be the leader of a conspiracy. There had to be a spy close to the Jarl. Erik looked down at the stone circle. He saw Astrid and the giant warrior, Rollo. They were standing near the center stone. Astrid's blue cloak moved in the wind. But they were not alone. A third person was walking toward them from the opposite side of the hill. This person was wearing a heavy red cloak. Red was the color of Jarl Sigurd's personal guards. Erik's heart sank. He recognized the walk and the height of the man. It was Gunnar. Gunnar was the second in command of the village guards. He was Erik's friend. They had fought side by side in many battles. Gunnar was a man the Jarl trusted with his life. No. Erik whispered to himself. He watched as Gunnar reached Astrid and Rollo. Gunnar did not draw his sword. Instead, he shook hands with Rollo. They looked like partners. Gunnar pulled a small leather bag from his belt and gave it to Astrid. She opened it and looked inside. She looked happy. Erik realized the truth. Gunnar was the spy. He was the one who drugged Ivor at the gate. He was the one who told Astrid where the golden axe was kept. Gunnar knew the Jarl's history, and he wanted to use the secret of the axe to take power for himself. Erik felt a deep anger. A traitor in the village was worse than a thief from the forest. Gunnar was a man of honor who had broken his promise to protect Kattegat. Erik looked at the iron box in his arms. He had the ring and the key. The traitors had the axe. They were waiting for him, or rather, they were waiting for Bjorn to bring the box. Suddenly, Gunnar looked up at the ridge. He was a sharp warrior, and he felt someone watching him. Erik moved back behind the rock, but he was a second too late. He heard Gunnar shout to the others. Someone is on the hill. Gunnar's voice was loud and clear. Erik knew he could not stay there. He had to move fast. If they caught him with the ring and the key, the mystery would be over, and the Jarl would be finished. He turned and started to run back toward the king's grave. He needed a plan, and he needed it now. Erik did not wait for Gunnar to reach him. He turned and ran down the back of the hill. He moved through the tall, dry grass like a fox. He knew the traitors had the golden axe, but he had the box and the silver ring. Without these, their plan was not complete. He had to keep them safe. He decided to go to the docks. He had a small, fast boat hidden near the old fishing pier. He could use it to reach the far side of the bay and hide in the caves. He reached the village. He stayed in the narrow paths between the houses. He saw the villagers preparing for the feast, but he did not stop to talk. His eyes were focused on the grey water of the sea. He reached the pier. The smell of salt and old wood was strong. He saw his boat. It was a light vessel made of dark oak. Erik jumped onto the wooden pier. He reached for the heavy rope that held the boat to the dock. He stopped suddenly. He looked at the rope in his hand. It was not tied. It was cut. The ends of the rope were sharp and clean. Someone used a very sharp knife to do this. He looked at the boat. It was moving slowly away from the pier. He saw a large hole in the bottom of the wood. The cold seawater was filling the boat quickly. In a few minutes, the boat would be at the bottom of the ocean. Erik felt a cold wave of fear. Someone in the village knew about his secret boat. They did not want him to leave. "You cannot run, Erik," a voice said from behind him. Erik turned around. It was not Gunnar. It was one of the village guards named Torsten. Torsten was a quiet man who usually stayed near the grain stores. He held a small knife in his hand. The blade was wet. He was the one who cut the ropes. "You too, Torsten?" Erik asked. He felt a deep sadness. "How many of you are working against the Jarl?" Torsten did not look ashamed. He looked hungry. "The Jarl is old, Erik. He keeps the gold for himself. Astrid promised us a better life. She promised us silver from the south. We are tired of being poor warriors in a cold village." Erik looked at the water and then at the village. He was trapped. To his left were the docks, and to his right was the open beach. He did not have his sword. He only had the heavy iron box. He looked at Torsten. The guard was not a great warrior, but he had a weapon. "Give me the box, Erik," Torsten said. He took a step forward. "If you give it to me, I will let you go. You can run into the mountains and never come back." Erik gripped the iron box. He thought about the Jarl and the history of the silver ring. He thought about the truth Olaf told him. He could not give the box to a traitor. Suddenly, the sky turned dark. A heavy cloud moved over the sun. The wind became very strong and cold. It was the start of a sudden northern storm. The waves began to hit the pier with great force. The wood under Erik's feet moved and groaned. This was his chance. He did not fight Torsten. Instead, he turned and ran toward the great hall. The storm was coming, and everyone would go inside for safety. In a crowd, he could disappear. The wind was now very strong. It pushed against the wooden walls of the houses. The sky was completely black. Then, the rain started. It was not a light rain. It was a wall of cold water. Erik ran toward the great hall. He held the iron box under his cloak to keep it dry. His boots splashed in the new puddles of mud. He reached the heavy doors and pulled them open. Inside, the great hall was crowded. Many villagers were there to stay dry. There were no children, only men and women with tired faces. They sat on the long benches and talked in low voices. The smell of wet wool and smoke filled the air. The large fire in the center of the room was fighting against the wind. The flames moved wildly, throwing long, shaking shadows on the walls. Erik saw Jarl Sigurd. The leader was standing near his high chair. He looked older than he did yesterday. His hands were resting on the wooden arms of his seat. He was watching the doors. Erik knew he had to hide the iron box immediately. He could not let Gunnar see it. He walked slowly along the wall, staying in the dark areas. He found a large wooden pillar near the back of the hall. Behind the pillar, a thick tapestry hung from the ceiling. It showed a picture of a great wolf. Erik stepped behind the tapestry. It was dusty and smelled like old earth. He knelt down. He found a loose stone in the floor near the base of the pillar. He moved the stone and placed the iron box in the small hole. He put the stone back and smoothed the dirt with his hands. Then he stepped out from behind the tapestry. He felt lighter, but his heart was still racing. At that moment, the main doors opened with a heavy thud as they hit the wall. The wind blew a cloud of rain into the hall. Gunnar and two other guards stepped inside. They were soaking wet. Gunnar wiped the water from his eyes and looked around the room. He looked like a wolf hunting for a sheep. He saw the Jarl and walked toward him. "Jarl Sigurd!" Gunnar called out. His voice was loud. It was stronger than the sound of the storm. "We have a problem. Erik has disappeared. I saw him near the pier. He was at a boat. I think he is the thief." The villagers stopped talking. They all looked at the Jarl. Sigurd stood up. His face was full of pain and anger. "Erik, my most loyal warrior. I do not believe it." "It is true," Gunnar said. "He was a very good liar. He is trying to leave Kattegat with your treasure. He is probably in the woods now, hiding from the rain." Erik watched from the shadows. He saw the people begin to believe Gunnar. He knew he had to wait for the right moment to speak. The storm was shaking the entire building. The heavy wooden beams made a low, groaning sound under the pressure of the wind. No one could leave the hall until the storm passed. They were all trapped together in the dark. Erik stayed very still in the shadows. He was behind the heavy tapestry, only a few meters away from where he hid the iron box. The great hall was full of the sound of the storm. Rain hit the roof like thousands of tiny hammers. People were talking loudly about the missing axe and Gunnar's news. No one looked toward the dark corner where Erik waited. Suddenly, Erik heard voices near him. They were not loud. They were quiet whispers. He held his breath. He pressed his ear against the cold wooden wall. Two people were standing on the other side of the tapestry. "Did you find him?" a woman asked. Erik recognized the voice. It was Helga, the village healer. This surprised him. Helga was usually very kind and helped everyone. "No," a man replied. "It was Gunnar." His voice was sharp and low. "He ran from the pier. He is fast, but he has nowhere to go. The storm is too strong for a small boat. If he is in the village, we will find him soon. He has the box." "Gunnar," Helga whispered. "Without the silver ring inside that box, the golden axe is just a heavy weapon. Astrid is waiting at the stone circle. She is not a patient woman. If we do not bring her the ring, she will tell the Jarl about our plan." Erik felt a cold shock. Helga was also a traitor. He thought about Ivor, the guard who fell asleep. Helga had given him food. Now Erik knew the truth. She had put a sleeping medicine in the meat to help the thieves. I know," Gunnar said. He sounded stressed. Torsten said Erik was carrying a package. "It must be the box. I will search every house in Kattegat if I have to. The Jarl thinks Erik is the thief now. That is good. It gives us time." "What about the Jarl?" Helga asked. "He is starting to ask questions about the history of the axe. He is old, but he is not a fool." Gunnar laughed quietly. It was a cold, mean sound. "The Jarl will not be a problem for long. Once we have the axe open and the treasure is ours, the village will need a new leader. A leader who is not afraid to use power. A leader like me." Erik felt his blood boil with anger. Gunnar was not just a thief. He wanted to steal the entire village. He wanted to replace Jarl Sigurd and lead Kattegat into a dark future. Erik realized he could not stay hidden forever. He needed to find a way to tell the Jarl the truth without being caught by Gunnar's guards. The two traitors moved away from the tapestry. Erik heard their boots on the dirt floor as they walked toward the center of the hall. He waited for a minute. Then he looked out from behind the cloth. The great hall was dim. The fire was lower now. He saw Gunnar talking to the Jarl. He saw Helga giving a cup of water to a tired warrior. They looked like honest people, but Erik knew their dark secret. He needed to act fast. Erik stayed in the shadows. He watched Helga the healer walk across the hall. She was carrying a silver cup. She walked toward Jarl Sigurd. The Jarl looked very tired. He sat in his large chair and rubbed his eyes. The storm outside was still loud, but the room was very quiet. Many people were watching the Jarl. They wanted to see if their leader was strong. Helga reached the Jarl. She had a small smile on her face. "You look very stressed, Jarl Sigurd," she said. Her voice was soft and kind. "The storm is loud, and the news about Erik is heavy. You must drink some ale to stay warm and calm." The Jarl looked at the cup. "Thank you, Helga. You are a good woman. You always care for the people of Kattegat." Erik remembered the whispers he heard behind the tapestry. Helga was not a good woman. She was a traitor. Erik looked at the cup in the Jarl's hand. He saw Helga's fingers move quickly over the rim. He saw a tiny flash of white powder fall into the dark liquid. It happened very fast. If Erik was not watching closely, he would not see it. "Wait!" Erik shouted. He stepped out from behind the tapestry. His voice was loud like a clap of thunder. Everyone in the great hall turned to look at him. Jarl Sigurd stopped with the cup near his lips. Gunnar reached for his sword. The villagers gasped. They thought Erik was a thief, and here he was, standing in the middle of the hall. "Erik!" The Jarl shouted. He looked surprised and angry. "Gunnar says you are the thief. Why are you here? Why are you stopping me from drinking? Do not drink that ale, Jarl," Erik said. He walked toward the center of the hall. He was wet and dirty, but he stood tall. Helga put something in the cup. She is working with Gunnar and the people from the forest. Gunnar laughed. He stepped forward and pointed his finger at Erik. "Do not listen to him. He is a liar. He is trying to confuse us so he can escape. He stole the golden axe, and now he wants to kill the healer who helps our sick." Helga looked at the Jarl with wide, innocent eyes. "I only wanted to help you sleep, Jarl. The ale is fresh from the barrel. Erik is a dangerous man. Guards, take him." 2 guards moved toward Erik. Erik did not move. He looked at the Jarl. "Jarl Sigurd, I have served you for many years. Have I ever lied to you? Give the cup to a dog or a bird. See what happens. If I am lying, you can take my head right now." The Jarl looked at the cup and then at Erik. He looked at Helga. She was starting to sweat. He looked at Gunnar. The second in command looked very nervous. The Jarl poured a little bit of the ale into a small wooden bowl on the table. He called a large hunting dog that was sitting near the fire. The dog licked the ale quickly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the dog's legs became weak. It made a quiet sound and fell onto its side. It was not dead, but it was in a very deep, unnatural sleep. The hall became deathly silent. Jarl Sigurd looked at the sleeping dog. Then he looked at Helga. His eyes were full of a terrible fire. Jarl Sigurd stood up slowly. The silver cup fell from his hand and hit the floor. The remaining ale spilled onto the stones, but no one moved to clean it. The Jarl looked at Helga. She was shaking now. Her face was as white as a winter cloud. She looked at Gunnar, but the guard captain turned his head away. He did not want to be connected to her crime. "You tried to put me to sleep, Helga," the Jarl said. His voice was very quiet, which was more frightening than a shout. "In my own hall, during a storm. Why?" Helga did not answer. She fell to her knees and covered her face with her hands. The Jarl looked at the guards. "Take her to the cellar. Lock the door. We will speak about her punishment when the sun rises." 2 guards grabbed Helga's arms and led her away. Erik stood in the middle of the hall. He felt a little bit of relief, but he knew the danger was not over. Gunnar was still standing there, and Gunnar was much more dangerous than the healer. Erik, the Jarl said. He looked at his warrior. You saved me, but the axe is still missing. Gunnar says you were at the docks with a boat. I was at the docks, Jarl, Erik replied. But I was not running away. I was following the trail. My boat was sabotaged. Someone cut the ropes and made a hole in the wood so I could not leave to find the thieves. Erik looked directly at Gunnar. Gunnar's hand was still on the handle of his sword. Gunnar is not telling you the truth, Jarl. He is the one working with the woman in the blue cloak. He is the one who wanted the healer to poison you. Gunnar stepped forward. This is madness. I am your loyal captain. Erik is trying to save himself by accusing me. He has no proof. He says there is a woman in a blue cloak. But has anyone else seen her? No. He says I am a traitor. But where is the evidence? The Jarl looked confused. He looked at his two best warriors. One was a hero who just saved his life. The other was a man who had protected the village for years. Erik, do you have proof? A warrior's word is strong, but a captain's word is also strong. Erik thought about the iron box hidden behind the tapestry. He thought about the silver ring and the iron key. If he showed them now, Gunnar might try to take them by force. The hall was full of Gunnar's friends. Suddenly, a man named Sven, the village's oldest doctor and Helga's teacher, stepped forward. He was a very old man with a long white beard. He held a small leather bag. Jarl Sigurd, Sven said. I found this in Helga's room this morning. I did not know what it was until now. He opened the bag and pulled out a piece of blue fabric. It was a small scrap of a blue cloak. I saw Gunnar giving this to her 2 days ago. He told her it was a gift from a traveler. But I recognize this silk. It is not from our lands. The Jarl took the blue fabric. He looked at the color. It was the same blue as the feather Erik found. The Jarl's eyes moved to Gunnar. The captain's face changed. He knew he was caught. Gunnar did not wait for the Jarl to speak. He looked at the blue fabric in the Jarl's hand and then at Erik. His face, once friendly, was now full of hate. He knew the old doctor had ruined his lie. Gunnar took a step back toward the center of the hall, near the fire. His hand moved to his sword. Sven is an old man, Gunnar said. His voice was shaking with anger. He sees things that are not there. That fabric could belong to anyone. Enough, Gunnar, Jarl Sigurd shouted. The sound was so loud it seemed to stop the wind outside. The doctor is honest. The dog is asleep. And Erik is here, standing before me while you try to hide behind words. The Jarl turned to Sven. Is there anything else in the bag, old man? Sven reached into the leather bag again. He pulled out a small piece of parchment. It was folded many times. I found this hidden inside the blue fabric. It is a note. I cannot read it well because the light in my room is poor, but the ink is fresh. The Jarl took the note. He opened it carefully. His eyes moved across the lines. Erik watched the Jarl's face. He saw the leader's jaw tighten. The Jarl looked at Gunnar, and then he looked at the mountains through the small window. It is a message, the Jarl said. It says, the sun is at the peak. The cave in the mountains is ready. Bring the key and the ring. We will finish the old king's legacy tonight. The Jarl looked at Gunnar. The cave in the mountains. Is that where you were going, Gunnar? To meet this Astrid and give her the secrets of our village. Gunnar did not answer. Instead, he whistled loudly. Suddenly, 4 guards standing near the doors drew their swords. They were Gunnar's men. They did not look at the Jarl. They looked at Gunnar. The villagers screamed and moved away from the weapons. The peaceful atmosphere of the great hall was gone. The Jarl is old and weak. Gunnar shouted to the room. He hides the truth about his brother. He hides the gold. We deserve more. In the confusion, Gunnar ran toward the back door of the hall. Erik tried to stop him, but two of Gunnar's guards blocked his path with their spears. Erik had no sword, so he had to jump back to avoid the sharp metal. Gunnar pushed through the small door and disappeared into the rain. Follow him. The Jarl ordered his loyal men. Do not let him reach the mountains. The loyal guards ran after the traitors. Erik did not follow them immediately. He knew something Gunnar did not know. Gunnar thought the key and the ring were with Helga, or perhaps still in the forge. He did not know Erik had hidden the iron box behind the tapestry. Erik walked to the back of the hall. The room was now full of chaos, with people shouting and moving. He reached the tapestry of the wolf. He reached down and pulled the iron box from the hole in the floor. He tucked it under his cloak. The cave. Erik whispered to himself. The note says the cave. He knew the mountains well. There was only one cave large enough for a group of people. It was high up on the mountain trail. Erik knew he had to get there first. He could not wait for the Jarl's guards. He had to finish this himself. Erik stepped out of the great hall and into the wild night. The storm was still very strong. The wind pushed against his chest like a giant hand. The rain was cold and felt like tiny needles on his skin. He looked toward the mountains. They were dark and tall. They looked like sleeping monsters against the grey sky. Erik did not have a horse. The path up the mountain was too steep and rocky for animals in this weather. He had to use his own legs. He held the iron box tightly against his side. The weight of the box was heavy, but it reminded him of his mission. He had to reach the cave before Gunnar and the others. The trail started behind the village well. It was a narrow path made of mud and stones. Because of the rain, the path was very slippery. Erik had to be very careful. One wrong step could send him falling down the side of the hill. He used a long wooden stick to help him balance. He moved slowly but steadily. As he climbed higher, the air became even colder. The rain began to turn into soft, white snow. The village of Kattegat looked very small below him. He could see the tiny orange lights of the fires in the houses. It looked like a peaceful place, but Erik knew it was full of secrets and danger. He felt a deep sadness. His friend Gunnar was a traitor, and his leader sat on a throne of lies. I must keep moving. Erik whispered. His breath made a thick white cloud in the freezing air. He reached a part of the trail called the Widow's Turn. It was a very narrow ledge with a sharp drop on one side. The wind was screaming here. It moved the trees and made the rocks slide. Erik pressed his back against the cold stone wall of the mountain. He moved inch by inch. He did not look down. He only looked at the path in front of him. Suddenly, he saw something in the snow. It was a footprint. It was a large, heavy print from a boot. It was fresh. The snow had not covered it yet. Erik stopped. This meant someone was in front of him. Was it Gunnar? Or was it one of Astrid's men? He realized he was not the only person on the mountain trail tonight. Erik checked the iron box one more time. It was safe under his cloak. He did not have his sword, but he had his courage. He continued to climb. The mountain was silent now, except for the sound of the wind. The higher he went, the more he felt the presence of the old spirits Olaf talked about. He was entering a place of ancient history. The cave was close now. He could see the dark opening in the rock just a few hundred meters away. Erik pushed his body forward. Every step was a battle against the mountain. The snow was now up to his knees. It was thick and heavy. His muscles felt like they were on fire, and his hands were numb from the freezing air. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath. He looked at the iron box. It was covered in a thin layer of frost. He wiped it away with his wet glove. The wind was different here. It did not just blow. It seemed to scream around the rocks. It was a high, sharp noise that never stopped. Erik pulled his hood lower. He could only see a few steps in front of him. The world was a wall of white and grey. He felt very small. He was just one man on a giant mountain, carrying a secret that could change everything. He thought about Jarl Harald, the brother who disappeared. If the old stories were true, Harald was a good man. Erik wondered if Harald's spirit was watching him now. Was the storm a way to test him? Or was the mountain trying to keep its secrets hidden forever? Erik did not know, but he refused to turn back. He had a duty to the truth. As he moved higher, the path became even more dangerous. The ice was hidden under the soft snow. Erik slipped and fell onto his knees. The iron box hit a rock with a heavy, metallic sound. Erik quickly checked the package. It was still closed. He sighed with relief. He stood up slowly, using his wooden stick to stay steady. His legs were shaking, but he forced himself to keep moving. He found another clue near a large, flat stone. It was a piece of red wool caught on a sharp rock. It was the same red as Gunnar's cloak. Gunnar was close. He was also struggling with the climb. Erik felt a new spark of energy. He was not just fighting the weather. He was hunting a traitor. He knew the mountain better than Gunnar. Gunnar spent his time in the Great Hall, drinking and talking. Erik spent his time in the woods and on the hills. The trail opened up into a wide plateau. The wind was even stronger here because there were no trees to block it. In the distance, Erik saw a faint light. It was not the orange light of a fire. It was a pale, blue glow. It was coming from the cave. Erik knew that blue light. It was the same color as Astrid's cloak and the feathers he found in the hall. He lowered his body and moved carefully across the open ground. He did not want to be seen against the white snow. His heart was beating fast. He was almost there. The long climb was finished, but the real danger was just beginning. He reached the edge of the plateau and looked at the dark mouth of the cave. It looked like a giant eye watching the valley below. The opening of the cave was wide and jagged, like the mouth of a stone dragon. Erik stayed low, crawling through the deep snow until he reached the shelter of the overhanging rocks. Here, the screaming wind died down to a low hum, and the air felt strangely warm. He could smell wood smoke and something sweet, like dried herbs. Erik peered around a large stalagmite near the entrance. The blue glow he had seen from the plateau was brighter now. It was coming from a cluster of torches mounted on the stone walls. These were not ordinary torches. The flames burned with a strange, sapphire light that cast long, dancing shadows across the ceiling. In the center of the large cavern stood a stone altar. Resting on top of it, shining brilliantly even in the dim light, was the golden axe. It looked magnificent, its surface carved with intricate runes that seemed to pulse in time with the flickering blue fire. Standing by the altar was Gunnar. He had removed his heavy red cloak and was panting heavily, his face red from the climb. Opposite him stood Astrid. She looked perfectly calm, as if she had not just climbed a mountain in a blizzard. She held a small, silver hammer in her hand. "Where is the boy, Gunnar?" Astrid asked. Her voice echoed off the damp walls. "The sun has passed its peak. You were supposed to bring the iron box and the ring." Gunnar slammed his fist onto the stone altar. "Erik found it. He's been one step ahead of us since the village. He knows about the poison, and he knows about the key. My men are searching for him, but the storm is a curse." Astrid's eyes narrowed. "If the box is lost, this weapon is useless." We cannot access the heart of the axe without the ring of the southern kings. My people did not travel across the great sea to be handed a piece of decorative gold. I will find him, Gunnar shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He's just a warrior. He doesn't understand the power he's holding. Erik felt the heavy iron box beneath his tunic. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed to hear more. He moved slightly to get a better view, but his frozen boots slipped on a patch of wet moss. The sound was small, a tiny scuff of leather on stone, but in the quiet of the cave, it sounded like a drum. Gunnar spun around, drawing his sword in one fluid motion. Who's there? Erik knew the game was up. He stood up slowly, stepping out from behind the stone pillar. He had no sword, but he held the iron box out in front of him like a shield. I have what you want, Gunnar, Erik said, his voice echoing with a strength he didn't know he still had. Astrid's face lit up with a predatory smile. The captain of the guard. I knew you were smarter than the others. Gunnar snarled, his eyes fixed on the box. Give it to me, Erik. Give it to me, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see the new world we're building. Erik looked at the golden axe on the altar and then at the traitors. He realized that the secret inside the axe was the only thing keeping him alive. If he gave them the box, they would have no reason to let him leave the cave. The blue torches hissed, casting eerie shadows that stretched across the jagged cave walls. Erik stood his ground, the heavy iron box clutched in his hands. He could feel the eyes of the traitors on him. Gunnar, the man he once called brother, and Astrid, the mysterious woman who had set this entire tragedy in motion. The box is not yours to take, Gunnar, Erik said, his voice echoing. It belongs to the history of this land. It belongs to the truth. Gunnar took a step forward, his sword tip scraping the stone floor. The truth is whatever the man with the gold says it is. Sigurd has ruled with lies for 20 winters. Why do you defend a man who stole a crown from his own blood? Astrid raised a hand, stopping Gunnar's advance. She looked at Erik with a strange kind of respect. You are a warrior of honor, Erik. That is why you are dangerous. You believe in the symbol, but you don't know the mechanism. She pointed the silver hammer toward the golden axe on the altar. The axe is not just gold. The handle is hollow, made of a metal from the south that does not rust or break. Inside is the Great Charter, the original treaty that gives the lands of the north to the heirs of Harald. Sigurd didn't just kill his brother, he stole the proof that he is a usurper. Erik looked at the axe. He finally understood why the blacksmith was so vital. The axe was a safe, and he held the only way to open it. And you? Erik asked, looking at Astrid. Why do you want a Viking treaty? The south is changing. Astrid replied calmly. My king wants stability in the north. He wants a leader who is beholden to him, not a wild wolf like Sigurd. If we reveal the charter, Sigurd falls, and we install a leader who understands the value of cooperation. A puppet. Erik spat. You want to turn Kattegat into a servant of the southern king. Gunnar growled, losing patience. I don't care about treaties or kings. I want the silver. Give me the box, Erik, or I will take it from your cold fingers. Erik looked around the cave. He was trapped. There were no other exits, and Gunnar was a master swordsman. However, Erik noticed something Gunnar didn't. Above the altar, a large, heavy stalactite hung precariously, loosened by the heat of the blue torches. If I give you the ring, Erik said, slowly reaching into the box. How do I know you won't kill me the moment the axe is open? You don't, Astrid said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But it is the only chance you have. Erik's fingers brushed the cold silver of the ring. He didn't pull it out. Instead, he gripped the heavy iron lid of the box. He knew he only had one move. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a survivor of the northern winters. He shifted his weight, preparing to throw the heavy box not at Gunnar, but at the base of the blue torch closest to the altar. "Then take it," Erik yelled. He launched the iron box with all his strength. It flew through the air, a black blur in the blue light. It didn't hit Gunnar. It smashed into the torch bracket, sending the sapphire flames flying into the dry moss and furs piled near the altar. The iron box struck the torch bracket with a violent, metallic rang. The sapphire flames didn't just flicker, they exploded. The strange oils inside the torches splattered onto the dry moss and the pile of heavy furs Astrid's men had left behind. In an instant, the cave was transformed into a chaotic theater of dancing blue light and thick, pungent smoke. Gunnar shielded his eyes, cursing as the sudden heat scorched his face. "You fool! You'll destroy the charter." Astrid scrambled backward, her calm mask finally breaking. "The ring." "Gunnar, the ring is in the box." Erik didn't wait to see if the box had survived the impact. He used the confusion to sprint toward the altar. His boots skidded on the uneven stone, but he lunged forward, his hands reaching for the golden axe. As his fingers closed around the cold, heavy handle, a surge of adrenaline raced through his veins. The weapon felt perfectly balanced, as if it had been waiting for a true warrior of Kattegat to reclaim it. But Gunnar was faster than he looked. Despite the smoke, the traitor captain lunged through the flames. He didn't go for the axe. He went for Erik. His shoulder slammed into Erik's ribs, sending both men crashing away from the altar and into the jagged cave wall. Erik gasped as the air left his lungs. He felt the cold edge of Gunnar's sword brush against his leather tunic. He rolled to the side, swinging the golden axe in a wide arc. The heavy head of the weapon hissed through the air, forcing Gunnar to leap back. "You're out of your league, Erik," Gunnar hissed, circling him. The blue fire reflected in his eyes, making him look like a demon from the underworld. "You were always the Jarl's favorite dog, but you don't have the stomach for what comes next." "I have the stomach for justice, Gunnar," Erik replied, his voice raspy from the smoke. The cave groaned. The heat from the growing fire was causing the frozen moisture in the ceiling to expand. Small pebbles began to rain down from above. The large stalactite Erik had noticed earlier was beginning to tremble. The fire, spreading toward the entrance, threatening to trap them all. The smoke, thickening rapidly, making it hard to breathe or see. The ceiling, destabilizing due to the rapid temperature change. Astrid was near the back of the cave, coughing into her sleeve. She saw the iron box lying in the middle of a pool of blue flame. She reached for it, but a piece of the ceiling cracked down between her and the prize. "Gunnar, we have to leave," she screamed. "The mountain is waking up." Gunnar ignored her. He was consumed by rage. He raised his sword for a final, crushing blow. Erik braced himself, holding the golden axe with both hands. He knew he couldn't just defend. He had to end this. As Gunnar swung, Erik didn't move back. He stepped in, using the shaft of the axe to block the sword hilt and slamming his forehead into Gunnar's nose. The sound of breaking bone echoed in the cavern. Gunnar staggered back, blood pouring down his face. At that exact moment, a thunderous crack split the air. The giant stalactite above the altar finally gave way. The world seemed to explode in a roar of grinding stone and shattering ice. The giant stalactite, heavy as a village house, slammed into the cave floor exactly where the altar had stood seconds before. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground that knocked Erik off his feet and threw Gunnar against the far wall. Dust and white powder filled the air, mixing with the thick, blue smoke of the dying torches. For a moment, there was a terrible silence, broken only by the sound of small rocks trickling down from the ceiling. Erik coughed, his lungs burning. He wiped the grit from his eyes and looked up. A massive wall of fallen stone now stood between him and the back of the cavern. Gunnar was gone, buried or blocked by the debris. Astrid was nowhere to be seen. She had likely fled through a side crevice or had been crushed in the first collapse. The box. Erik croaked. He looked toward the center of the cave. The blue fire was flickering out, smothered by the fallen dust, but a glint of black metal caught his eye. The iron box lay half buried under a pile of shale. Erik scrambled toward it, his fingers stinging as he grabbed the soot-covered metal. It was hot, but the lock held firm. He stood up, the golden axe in one hand and the iron box in the other. He had the two pieces of the puzzle, but the mountain was not finished with him. Another deep groan rumbled through the floor. The dragon's mouth was closing. The entrance to the cave was beginning to crumble as the heat from the strange blue fire weakened the ancient ice holding the rocks together. Erik turned toward the light of the storm. He didn't look back for Gunnar. There was no time for mercy or vengeance. He ran. The exit was narrowing. Boulders the size of shields were dropping from the archway. Erik dove through the opening, sliding across the slick, frozen plateau just as a final, massive slide of snow and rock sealed the cave behind him. He lay in the snow, gasping for air. The blizzard was still screaming, but the blue fire and the traitors were gone. He was alone on the peak of the world. He looked down at the axe and the box. He had the power to destroy Jarl Sigurd, or to save the village from a war with the south. He began the long walk down. The descent was faster, driven by the weight of the secrets he carried. He didn't follow the main trail. He stayed in the trees, moving like a ghost. He needed to reach the Great Hall before Gunnar's loyalists realized their leader was lost. As the first light of a grey dawn touched the horizon, Erik reached the outskirts of Kattegat. The village was quiet, exhausted by the storm. He walked toward the Great Hall, his heart heavy. He knew that by the time the sun fully rose, the world he knew would be changed forever. The doors of the Great Hall groaned as Erik pushed them open. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of silver frost and eerie silence. Inside, the fire had burned down to a pile of glowing orange embers. Jarl Sigurd sat alone on his high throne, his head resting in his hands. He looked like a man who had already aged 100 years in a single night. He looked up as Erik approached. He saw the golden axe in Erik's right hand and the iron box in his left. There was no joy in the Jarl's eyes, only a deep, hollow fear. "You returned," Sigurd whispered. "Gunnar's men came back an hour ago. They said the mountain fell. They said you were dead." "The mountain fell on the traitors, Jarl," Erik said. He walked to the center of the hall and placed the golden axe on the heavy oak table. Next to it, he set the iron box. "Gunnar is gone. Astrid is gone. But the secrets they sought are here." Erik opened the iron box. He took out the iron key and the silver ring with the lion mark. The villagers, waking from their sleep on the benches, began to gather around in a wide, silent circle. They watched as Erik held the ring up to the light. "Olaf the Navigator told me a story, Sigurd," Erik said, his voice ringing through the hall. "He told me of a brother named Harald. He told me of a battle, a missing ring, and a stolen throne." Sigurd's hands trembled on the arms of his chair. "Olaf is a senile fool. He speaks of ghosts." "Then let the axe speak," Erik replied. He picked up the golden axe. Near the base of the handle, there was a small, hidden indentation. Erik pressed the silver ring into the slot. It fit perfectly. Suddenly, a small panel on the side of the golden handle clicked open, revealing a deep keyhole. Erik inserted the iron key and turned it twice to the left. With a sound like a sighing breath, the handle of the axe split down the center. It was hollow. Inside lay a tightly rolled cylinder of vellum, sealed with dark red wax. Erik pulled it out and broke the seal. Erik held the parchment high. This is the Great Charter. It proves that Harold did not die in battle. It proves he was betrayed by his own blood so that you could take the gold and the power. Astrid didn't want the gold. She wanted the proof to hold over your head forever. The hall was silent. The villagers looked from the document to their Jarl. Sigurd didn't fight. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply slumped forward, the weight of 20 years of lies finally crushing him. He wouldn't lead us to war. Sigurd said, his voice breaking. Harold wanted peace. He wanted to trade. He wanted us to be like the Southerners. I did it for our tradition. I did it to keep us strong. You did it for yourself. Erik said firmly. Erik turned to the people of Kattegat. The sun was finally rising, its light hitting the golden axe and making it glow with a pure, honest light. The mystery was solved, but the village was now without a true leader. Erik looked at the axe and then at the door. He had fulfilled his duty, but he knew his journey as a simple guard was over. The sun rose fully over Kattegat, but there was no celebration. The great hall felt cold despite the roaring fire. Jarl Sigurd sat on the floor, his fine furs stripped away, replaced by a simple woolen tunic. He was no longer the master of the north. He was a man waiting for a sentence. Erik stood at the head of the hall, the golden axe held firmly in his grip. The weight of the weapon seemed to anchor him to the earth as the villagers looked to him for direction. You led us for 20 winters, Sigurd. Erik began, his voice echoing in the rafters. We fought for you. We bled for you. We believed your word was as solid as the mountains. But those mountains crumbled last night, and so did your honor. Sigurd did not look up. The village survived. Erik, is that not worth a few lies? Look at the other tribes. They are gone, eaten by the south or destroyed by their own civil wars. Kattegat remained. At the cost of your brother's life and the people's trust. Erik replied. You stole a crown that was never yours. You allowed a foreign king to hold a knife to our throats through blackmail. That is not survival, that is slavery. The council of elders, men and women with faces like wrinkled parchment, whispered among themselves. Finally, Olaf the navigator stepped forward. He leaned on his staff, his cloudy eyes fixed on the empty throne. According to the laws of our fathers, a Jarl who takes his seat through blood betrayal cannot remain. But we are a small village. We cannot afford a bloody execution. The South is watching. Erik looked at the villagers. He saw the anger in some eyes and the fear in others. What is your judgment? Olaf. Exile. Olaf declared. The word carried the weight of a death sentence in the frozen north. Sigurd shall be given a small boat, a week's food, and a single spear. He is to leave Kattegat and never return. If he is seen on our shores again, his life is forfeit. His name will be erased from the songs of the Great Hall. Sigurd's shoulders slumped. For a Viking, to be forgotten was a fate worse than death. 2 guards stepped forward to take him away. As they reached the door, Sigurd stopped and looked back at Erik. You think you have saved them, Erik? Sigurd asked, a ghost of a smile on his lips. You have only opened the door. The Southern King wanted that charter for a reason. Now that the axe is open, he won't stop until he owns the hand that holds it. Erik did not answer. He watched as the man who was once his hero was led into the bright morning light, destined to become a ghost in the woods. But Erik's heart remained heavy. He looked at the great charter lying on the table. The mystery of the axe was solved, but a new, more dangerous chapter was beginning. The departure of Sigurd left a vacuum in Kattegat that felt like a coming storm. The villagers returned to their homes, but the air was thick with tension. Erik remained in the great hall with the elders. The golden axe sat on the table between them, its handle still split open, the hidden mechanism exposed like an open wound. The charter of Jarl Harald lay next to it, the vellum curling in the heat of the fire. "We need a leader," said Helgi, a woman who managed the village's grain stores. "The fishing fleets need orders. The walls need repair from the storm. Without a Jarl, we are just a target for the next raider who passes our bay." The charter names Harald's heirs. Erik reminded them, pointing to the scrolling text. "It says the lineage must continue through his daughter, Elara." Sigurd said she died in the same storm that took Harald, but the charter was hidden to prevent anyone from looking for her. Olaf the navigator nodded slowly. If Sigurd lied about the battle, he likely lied about the girl. He could not kill a child. Perhaps. He was a thief, but even he had limits in the beginning. If Elara is alive, she would be a woman grown now. Helgi noted. Where would he hide the true heir to Kattegat? Somewhere far enough to be forgotten, but close enough to watch. Erik thought about the silver ring with the lion mark. The ring came from the south. Bjorn said Astrid was looking for it. If Harald's wife was a southern princess, perhaps Elara was sent back to her mother's people. But the charter mentions a protector in the mist. The elders looked at each other. The mist was a common name for the islands to the west, a place of jagged rocks and constant fog where the outcasts and the hermits lived. It was a dangerous place, far from the trade routes. "I will find her," Erik said, his voice firm. "If there is a true Jarl of Kattegat left in this world, I will bring her home. Kattegat needs more than a guard. It needs its soul back. You are our only captain left, Erik," Olaf warned. "If you leave, who defends us from Gunnar's remnants or Astrid's king?" Bjorn the blacksmith is a good man at heart, and he knows the defenses. Erik replied. "And you, Olaf, know the minds of the people. I will take a small crew, loyal men who are not swayed by Gunnar's gold. We will sail for the mist at dawn." The council agreed, though their faces remained grim. As Erik left the hall to prepare his gear, he felt the weight of the silver ring in his pocket. He was no longer just a warrior looking for a stolen axe. He was a kingmaker, sailing into the unknown to find a woman who didn't even know she owned a throne. The mystery was expanding beyond the village walls, into the deep, dark waters of the North Sea. The sea was a restless shade of slate grey as Erik's boat, the Seawolf, cut through the waves. He had chosen only 4 men. Eivor, who had recovered from his drugged sleep and was eager to prove his loyalty. Sven the doctor, and 2 young warriors who had remained steadfast during the night of the storm. They carried minimal supplies to keep the boat fast. "The fog is getting thicker, Captain," Eivor shouted over the spray of the water. Erik stood at the prow, his eyes searching the horizon. They were approaching the islands of the mist. The air here was colder, and the water was filled with sea teeth, sharp, hidden rocks that could tear the bottom out of a boat in seconds. Erik held a map he had taken from Sigurd's private chambers. It was a crude drawing, but it marked a single sheltered cove on the largest island. "Stay sharp," Erik commanded. "The currents are pulling us toward the cliffs." As they neared the shore, a shape emerged from the fog. It wasn't a rock, and it wasn't another boat. It was a tall, wooden pole stuck into the sand, topped with the skull of a great bear. It was a warning. This was the territory of the Ghost of the North, a hermit mentioned in village legends who was said to guard the secrets of the islands. "We come in peace," Erik yelled, though the wind swallowed his words. They landed the boat on a strip of black shingle beach. Erik stepped onto the sand, the golden axe strapped to his back. He felt as if he were being watched by 1,000 eyes. He led his men toward a small path that wound upward into the trees. The vegetation here was strange, stunted by the salt and wind, draped in long tresses of grey moss. Suddenly, an arrow thudded into a tree inches from Erik's head. It didn't have a metal tip. It was made of sharpened bone. "Stop!" A voice boomed. It was a woman's voice, but it was rough, like stones rubbing together. A figure dropped from a high branch. She was dressed in furs and leather, her face painted with white ash. She held a long spear tipped with flint. She was tall and moved with the grace of a mountain cat. Erik froze. He saw the silver chain around her neck. Hanging from it was a small piece of blue sea glass, carved into the shape of a lion. "You have the ring of my father," she said, her eyes fixed on Erik's pocket, even though the ring was hidden. "And you carry the weapon of a murderer." Erik realized with a jolt of shock that he hadn't found a lost princess waiting to be rescued. He had found a hunter who had survived the harshest place on earth. "Elara?" Erik asked. The woman leveled her spear at his throat. "That name died in the waves 20 years ago. I am the Mistwalker. Why have you brought the golden axe to my shore, warrior?" Erik did not lower his gaze, even as the flint tip of the spear pressed against the skin of his neck. He could see the fire in Elara's eyes, a mix of royal pride and the wildness of a woman who had raised herself in the heart of a storm. Behind him, Ivor and the young warriors reached for their weapons, but Erik raised a hand to stop them. Any blood spilled here would end the hope of Kattegat forever. "I did not bring this axe to threaten you, Elara," Erik said, his voice calm and resonant. "I brought it to restore what was stolen. Your father was a man of peace and honor. His brother, Sigurd, was a man of shadows. The shadows have been cleared." Elara's grip on the spear did not loosen. "My father is a ghost. My mother died of a broken heart in a hut made of driftwood. Sigurd sat on a throne of gold while I learned to hunt seals with a bone knife to stay alive. Why should I care for a village that forgot I existed?" Erik reached into his tunic and pulled out the Great Charter. He held the vellum toward her. "They did not forget you. They were lied to. They were told you were at the bottom of the sea. This document, hidden inside the handle of the axe you see on my back, proves your right to lead. It proves that the Southern King acknowledged your father as the only true Jarl." Elara snatched the parchment with her free hand. She scanned the runes and the southern seals, her expression shifting from anger to a profound, painful realization. She looked at the silver ring Erik held out, the lion mark matching the glass ornament around her neck. The legacy of her parents was not a myth. It was a heavy, physical reality. "The Southern King," she whispered, her voice losing its edge. "He did not send help when the sails of Sigurd appeared on the horizon. He watched my father fall and then traded with the murderer. Because Sigurd was a puppet he could control." Erik explained. "The King of the South wanted a weak North. But the people of Kattegat are not weak. They are tired of lies. They need someone who belongs to the mountains and the sea, not someone who belongs to a foreign court." Elara looked back at her small hut, hidden in the mossy rocks. It was a lonely life, but it was a safe one. To return was to step into a den of wolves. She looked at the golden axe. Its surface reflected the grey light of the misty island, looking more like a burden than a prize. "I am a hunter, Erik," she said, finally lowering her spear. "I know how to track a bear and how to read the stars. I do not know how to rule a village." "Rule as a hunter then," Erik replied. "Track the traitors and protect the pack. That is all a Jarl ever needs to do." The conversation was cut short by a sound that didn't belong to the island. It wasn't the cry of a gull or the crashing of waves. It was the sharp, rhythmic snap of oars hitting the water. Erik spun around, his hand flying to the hilt of his borrowed sword. Out of the thick, white fog, a longship emerged. It wasn't a Viking ship. It was narrow, built for speed, with a sail the color of dried blood. The Southern King's scouts. Erik hissed. Astrid must have survived the cave. She led them here. Into the trees. Elara commanded. She didn't hesitate. She moved with a speed that made Erik's warriors look clumsy. They do not know these woods. The mist is my ally. Erik and his men scrambled into the dense, moss-draped forest. They watched from the shadows as a dozen soldiers in polished steel breastplates jumped from the ship onto the black shingle beach. These were not the desperate traitors of Gunnar's group. These were professional soldiers, armed with crossbows and short, heavy swords. At their head was a man in an ornate helmet, his movements precise and cold. The king wants the woman and the scroll. The commander shouted, "Burn the hut. Leave nothing but ash." The soldiers moved toward the path, their armor clanking. In the open, Erik's men would be cut down by the crossbows. But in the tangled woods of the Mist Island, the terrain was a maze. Ivar, Sven, stay behind the great oak. Erik whispered, "Wait for my signal." Suddenly, a soldier at the back of the line cried out and disappeared into a hole covered in leaves. A moment later, a bone-tipped spear flew from the canopy, striking another soldier in the shoulder. It was Elara. She was moving through the branches like a spirit. "They are distracted," Erik yelled, drawing his sword. "For Kattegat." Erik charged the commander, the golden axe still strapped to his back. The clash of steel on steel rang out through the fog. The southern soldiers were used to formation fighting on flat ground. They struggled with the slippery roots and the hanging moss. Erik fought with a ferocity born of desperation. He parried a thrust and slammed his shield into a soldier's chest, sending him tumbling down the slope toward the sea. From the trees, Elara dropped onto the commander's back. She didn't use a sword. She used a jagged hunting knife made of obsidian. Before the man could react, she had disabled him and vanished back into the mist. The soldiers, seeing their leader fall so quickly to a ghost, began to panic. Back to the ship. One of them cried. They retreated, dragging their wounded. Erik didn't pursue them. He knew there would be more coming. The Southern King had revealed his hand. He wasn't just interested in the charter. He wanted to erase the lineage of Harold once and for all. The beach was quiet again, save for the retreating sound of the southern oars. Elara stood by the water's edge, her face splattered with the dark blood of the invaders. She looked at the burning remains of her hut. The soldiers had succeeded in destroying her home, but they had failed to take her life. They will return with a fleet. Elara said, her voice cold. My father thought he could bargain with them. He thought a treaty on vellum would protect his people. He was wrong. Steel is the only language they respect. Erik walked up to her. He saw the change in her eyes. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. She was no longer just a hunter. She was a woman who had seen her enemy's face. Then we must give them a response in steel. Erik said. We sail back to Kattegat. We rally the village, and we prepare the defenses. If the Southern King wants our land, he will have to pay for it in blood. The Sea-Wolf was prepared. Ivor and the others worked quickly, loading the few supplies Elara had saved. As they made ready to depart, Erik handed the golden axe to Elara. This is yours, he said. The weight of it is heavy, but it is the only thing that will make the village listen. When you walk into the great hall, you must walk as the daughter of Harold. Elara took the axe. She felt the runes under her fingers. I will not be the Jarl my father was. Erik. I will not sign treaties with men who burn homes. If I lead, Kattegat will be a fortress, not a marketplace. That is exactly what we need. Erik replied. They pushed the boat into the surf. As the Sea-Wolf moved away from the island of the mist, Erik looked back at the smoke rising from the trees. He knew that the mystery of the golden axe had reached its final stage. It was no longer a search for a thief or a treasure. It was a war for the soul of the North. The journey back would be dangerous. The Southern Fleet was likely patrolling the main channels. Erik stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Beside him, Elara stood tall, the golden axe gleaming in the pale light. They were two warriors, returning to a village in chaos, carrying the only hope for a new dawn. "Captain!" Eivor called out from the mast. "Sails on the horizon." "3 ships, no. 4. They have the red lion on their banners." Erik gripped the tiller. "Prepare for battle, men. We don't need to outrun them. We just need to break through." The 4 southern ships moved with a predatory grace, their red lion banners snapping like angry tongues in the rising wind. They were larger than the Seawolf, built with high sides and fortified afterdecks where archers stood ready. Erik gripped the tiller, his knuckles white. He knew his small crew couldn't win a direct boarding action against 40 professional soldiers. He had to use the one advantage the North always held over the South: the terrain of the water. "They're trying to hem us in against the reef," Eivor shouted, pointing to the jagged rocks foaming to the starboard side. "Let them try." Erik grunted. "Elara, get to the prow. If they get close enough for a grapple, you're our only chance to break the line." Elara nodded, her white ash war paint making her look like a vengeful spirit. She gripped the golden axe, its runes shimmering as if sensing the coming blood. She wasn't used to shipboard combat, but she understood the physics of weight and momentum. She stood tall, defying the crossbow bolts that began to whistle through the air. The first southern ship, the Argent, surged forward. Its commander, a man in gilded plate, shouted an order. A volley of fire arrows arched through the grey sky, trailing black smoke. "Drench the sails," Erik commanded. Sven and the young warriors threw buckets of seawater over the heavy wool of the Seawolf's sail just as the burning shafts thudded into the wood. The damp fabric hissed, extinguishing the flames. "Erik, the gap is closing," Elara cried. "Now!" Erik roared, throwing the tiller hard over. The Seawolf didn't turn away from the reef. It dove into the shallow water. The southern ships, with their deep keels and heavy ballasts, couldn't follow. The Argent tried to mimic the turn, but a sickening crunch echoed across the waves. The southern ship had struck a hidden sea tooth, its hull ripped open by the ancient granite. The second ship slowed in confusion, but the third and fourth continued the pursuit, flanking the Seawolf from the deeper channel. One southern galley pulled alongside, its iron grappling hooks flying through the air. They bit into the Seawolf's gunwale. "Boarders!" Eivor yelled, drawing his short sword. 3 southern soldiers leaped onto the deck, their short swords flashing. Erik couldn't leave the helm, but Elara moved like a blur of fur and steel. She swung the golden axe in a low, horizontal sweep. The sheer weight of the weapon, combined with her hunter's strength, sheared through the lead soldier's shield as if it were dry parchment. She didn't stop. She used the blunt side of the axe head to thrust a second soldier back into the sea. The third soldier hesitated, terrified by the wild woman wielding a king's treasure. Erik saw the opening. He pulled a throwing knife from his belt and sent it spinning into the soldier's throat. "Cut the lines!" Erik screamed. Eivor hacked through the hemp ropes of the grapples. The Seawolf lurched free, but a final crossbow bolt struck the mast with a splintering crack. The great wooden beam groaned, leaning dangerously to the left. They were free for the moment, but the Seawolf was crippled, and Kattegat was still leagues away. The Seawolf wallowed in the troughs of the waves, its mast leaning like a broken wing. The fourth southern ship was still behind them, its oars rhythmically beating the water as it gained ground. Erik knew the mast wouldn't hold if the wind picked up, and without a sail, they were sitting ducks for the southern archers. "We have to ditch the mast," Erik said, his voice grim. "If it falls, It'll capsize us or smash the hull. But then we have no speed. Sven argued, helping Ivar tie a bandage around a shallow cut on his arm. We'll never reach the harbor before they catch us. We won't go to the harbor. Elara intervened, looking at the coastline. The broken shield bay is just ahead. The entrance is narrow, barely wide enough for a longship, and far too small for that southern monster behind us. Erik looked at her, impressed. The broken shield was a legendary graveyard of ships, a place of swirling eddies and razor-sharp cliffs. It's a suicide run in this weather. Elara. It's our only run. She replied. I spent 10 years watching the tides from the mist. I know how the water moves through those rocks. Trust the huntress. Captain. Erik nodded. Ivar. Sven. Get the axes. Chop the mast at the base on my mark. Elara. Take the secondary tiller. I'll need your strength to keep us from the rocks. As the southern ship closed the distance to within 50 yards, Erik gave the signal. The mast of the Seawolf came down with a thunderous crash, falling into the sea and acting as a temporary anchor. They hacked the last ropes free and took to the oars. It was backbreaking work, the 4 men pulling with everything they had, while Elara steered them toward the jagged maw of the broken shield. The southern galley tried to follow, its captain clearly desperate to capture the golden axe. They saw the southern ship's oars falter as the currents caught them. The galley was too wide. Its oars struck the cliff walls on either side, snapping like toothpicks. The Seawolf, narrow and nimble even without its sail, slipped through the needle's eye of the bay. They are stuck. Ivar laughed, though his breath was coming in ragged gasps. But the victory was short-lived. A sudden swell lifted the Seawolf and slammed it against a submerged rock. Erik felt the floorboards under his feet splinter. Cold seawater began to rush into the hold. We're sinking. Sven cried. Paddle. Erik commanded. We're only a mile from the Kattegat shoreline. If we can't sail, we'll swim. But that axe is reaching the Great Hall tonight. They rowed with the desperation of dying men. The Seawolf was heavy with water, its prow dipping lower with every stroke. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the keel scraped against the familiar sands of the home beach. The Seawolf had finished its journey. It settled into the sand, its ribs broken, a noble end for a loyal vessel. Erik leaped into the waist-deep water, holding his sword high. Beside him, Elara emerged, the golden axe held aloft. They had returned to Kattegat, but the village was not as they had left it. Kattegat was a hive of chaotic activity. Smoke rose from the cooking fires, but there was a sharp, metallic tang in the air, the smell of a village preparing for war. As Erik and his bedraggled crew marched up the beach, the villagers stopped their work. Women carrying bundles of arrows and men sharpening spears froze at the sight of the shipwrecked warriors. It's Erik! Someone shouted. His back! And look, the axe! The crowd parted as they approached the Great Hall. Erik noticed that the defenses had been improved. Bjorn the blacksmith had clearly been busy, installing iron spikes along the wooden palisades. But the faces of the people were pale. They were terrified. At the entrance of the hall, Olaf the navigator and Helgi stood waiting. Their eyes didn't go to Erik. They went to the woman standing beside him. Elara was a striking figure, tall, scarred, and wearing the fierce beauty of the Mist Islands. The golden axe in her hand looked as if it were a natural extension of her arm. Who is this? Helgi asked, her voice trembling. She is the answer to your prayers and the end of Sigurd's lies. Erik announced. She is Elara, daughter of Harald, the true heir of the North. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some fell to their knees. Others looked skeptical, whispering about ghosts and tricks. Prove it. A voice cried from the back. one of Gunnar's old friends who hadn't been exiled. Any woman can put on paint and hold an axe. Sigurd said the line was dead. Elara didn't wait for Erik to defend her. She stepped forward, the golden axe's runes catching the dying sunlight. She reached into the pouch at her belt and pulled out the great charter, holding it high for all to see. "I am the girl who was tossed to the waves," she roared, her voice silencing the crowd. "I am the woman who survived the mist. My father's blood is in this soil, and his signature is on this vellum. I do not ask for your throne. I am here to defend my home from the king who thinks we are his sheep." She turned to Bjorn, who had emerged from his forge, covered in soot. "Blacksmith, you made the key that opened this weapon. Tell them, is this the axe of Harald?" Bjorn walked closer, his eyes wet with tears. He touched the golden scrollwork. "I know every hammer mark on this weapon. This is the heart of Kattegat. And this woman, she has the eyes of the king I served 20 years ago." The skepticism vanished, replaced by a desperate, hopeful energy. But the moment was broken by the sound of a horn blowing from the watchtower. "Sails!" The sentry screamed. "The southern fleet. 10 ships. They're entering the bay." Erik looked at Elara. The homecoming was over. The war had arrived. "You wanted to be a hunter, Elara," Erik said, drawing his sword. "The prey has arrived at our door. What are your orders, Jarl?" Elara gripped the golden axe, her face setting into a mask of stone. "Close the gates. Light the signal fires. Tonight, the south learns that the north does not break." The horizon was no longer a line of sea and sky. It was a forest of masts and blood-red sails. 10 southern galleys, the vanguard of a royal fleet, moved into the mouth of the bay with disciplined precision. They didn't rush toward the beach. They knew that the shallow waters of Kattegat were treacherous. Instead, they dropped anchor just outside the reef, their high decks bristling with ballistae and archers. In the village, the panic of the afternoon had turned into a cold, grim determination. Under Elara's direction and Erik's tactical knowledge, Kattegat had become a hive of defensive preparation. Bjorn the blacksmith worked at his forge until the iron glowed like a fallen star, hammering out spearheads and reinforcement brackets for the main gate. "We cannot win a battle on the open water," Erik explained to the gathered warriors in the great hall. "Their ships are floating fortresses. We must draw them onto the sand, where their heavy armor and rigid formations will be a disadvantage against our knowledge of the terrain." Elara stood by the hearth, the golden axe leaning against her chair. She had swapped her island furs for a coat of reinforced leather and a chainmail shirt salvaged from the armory. "They will target the great hall first. It is the symbol of our power. If the hall falls, the village loses its heart. They'll use fire." Erik noted. "The Southern King loves to burn what he cannot own. Sven, gather every bucket and barrel. We need water stations at every corner of the village. Ivor, take the scouts to the North Ridge. If they try to land a flanking party in the small coves, you must hold them until I can bring the main force." As the sun disappeared, the first southern message arrived. A massive ballista bolt, wrapped in oil-soaked rags and set ablaze, hissed through the night sky. It struck the watchtower with a thunderous crack, showering the docks in orange sparks. It was the signal. The galleys began to lower their landing boats, dozens of them, filled with soldiers in gleaming breastplates. "To the walls!" Erik roared. The villagers took their positions. Men and women who had spent their lives fishing and farming now held shields and axes with white-knuckled grips. Elara walked along the palisade, her presence a silent promise of strength. She didn't give a speech. She simply looked each warrior in the eye, her white war paint glowing in the light of the fires. The first wave of southern boats hit the shore. The soldiers leaped into the surf, their shields forming a testudo or turtle shell of steel to protect them from the rain of Viking arrows. They moved like a slow, metallic tide toward the gates of Kattegat. The siege had begun, and the air was filled with the screams of the dying and the rhythmic thud of southern hammers against the wooden heart of the north. The southern soldiers reached the main gate of Kattegat, their heavy iron rams swinging in a steady, murderous rhythm. Each impact shook the ground, sending dust falling from the rafters of the nearby houses. Erik stood directly behind the gate, his sword drawn. Beside him stood a line of the village's strongest warriors, their shields locked together to form a secondary wall. "Hold the line," Erik commanded. "They want us to break and run. Do not give them a single inch." Above them, on the walkway of the palisade, Elara and the archers were raining down death. But the southern armor was high quality, and for every soldier who fell, 2 more took his place. The commander of the southern forces, a man in black and gold plate armor named General Valerus, stood on the beach, directing the flow of the battle with a silver baton. He was a master of siegecraft, and he was methodically dismantling the village's defenses. "They are through," a voice screamed from the left. The southern forces had used a specialized grappling hook to pull down a section of the wooden wall that had been weakened by the previous storm. A flood of steel-clad soldiers poured through the gap. Erik knew that if they weren't stopped, they would encircle the gate and the defense would collapse. "Elara!" "The gap!" Erik yelled, pointing toward the breach. Elara didn't take the stairs. She leaped from the high walkway, the golden axe held high above her head. She landed in the middle of the southern formation, the impact of her landing sending soldiers stumbling back. She was a whirlwind of golden light and obsidian shadow. The axe, heavy and perfectly balanced, cleaved through the southern breastplates as if they were made of tin. The villagers, seeing their jarl fighting in the mud and blood, found a new surge of strength. They charged into the breach, using their shorter, heavier axes to get under the long swords of the southerners. It was a brutal, close-quarters slaughter. The ground became slick with blood and sea mud, making every step a gamble. "Push them back to the sea." Elara's voice rose above the din of battle. In the center, Erik faced a southern captain. The man was skilled, his rapier-like sword moving with a speed Erik had never seen. Erik didn't try to out-finesse him. He waited for the thrust, caught the blade in the notch of his shield, and used his brute strength to shatter the man's arm with the hilt of his sword. Bit by bit, the iron wall of the south began to crack. They were not used to the ferocity of people defending their homes. They were soldiers fighting for pay. The Vikings were fighting for their lives. The first wave began to retreat toward the boats, leaving dozens of their comrades dead in the breach. But as the villagers cheered, Erik looked back at the galleys. The second wave was already in the water, and this time, they were bringing something much larger. The second wave did not consist of foot soldiers. As the boats neared the shore, Erik saw massive, low-slung platforms topped with heavy silk tents. From beneath the tents emerged 2 towering structures, siege towers, built onto the hulls of the largest landing craft. They were designed to tower over the village walls, allowing archers to fire down into the hall and soldiers to walk directly onto the palisades. "They're going to bypass the gate entirely," Erik realized, his heart sinking. "Bjorn, we need the dragon's breath." The dragon's breath was a secret defense Bjorn and Erik had devised, barrels of whale oil mixed with pitch and dried peat. They had buried them beneath the sand of the upper beach, connected by long, buried fuses made of resin-soaked hemp. General Valerus, seeing the towers reach the dry sand, smiled. He signaled his trumpeters. A low, haunting blare echoed across the bay. The siege towers began to move forward, pushed by dozens of hidden men. The archers at the top opened fire, their arrows tipped with southern fire, a chemical mixture that burned even in the rain. "Now, Bjorn!" Erik shouted. Bjorn, standing near the forge, struck a flint. He touched a torch to the ground. The flame raced along the hidden fuse, a hissing snake of fire that disappeared under the sand. A second later, the beach exploded. A wall of fire roared upward, engulfing the front of the siege towers. The whale oil burned with an intense, blue-white heat, melting the southern silk and setting the wooden supports ablaze. The towers became giant chimneys of fire. The soldiers trapped inside screamed as the structures collapsed into the sand. The southern formation was broken by the wall of flame. But Valerus was not finished. He stepped forward himself, his black and gold armor shimmering. He wasn't carrying a sword. He was carrying a massive, heavy mace tipped with a sapphire. Jarl of the North. Valerus bellowed, his voice amplified by his helmet. You hide behind fire and walls. If you are the true blood of Harold, come out and face the king's justice. If I win, Kattegat surrenders. If you win, my ships leave these shores forever. Erik looked at Elara. It was a gamble, a classic southern trick to end a siege quickly. But it was also a chance to end the killing of their people. He's trying to goad you. Elara. Erik whispered. He's a champion of the southern arena. He's fought 1,000 duels. Elara looked at the golden axe, then at the burning village. I have fought the sea and the hunger for 20 years. Erik. A man in a gold suit does not frighten me. If I don't go, he will simply bring more ships tomorrow. I end this now. She stepped through the scorched gates, the golden axe resting on her shoulder. The fire on the beach cast long, flickering shadows as the huntress of the mist walked out to face the general of the south. The beach of Kattegat became a silent arena. On one side, the villagers of the north stood atop their scorched walls, their breath visible in the cold air. On the other, the silver-clad ranks of the southern empire stood like statues, their torches flickering. In the center, the sand was still warm from the dragon's breath, the air thick with the scent of ozone and salt. General Valerus swung his sapphire-tipped mace in a slow, hypnotic circle, the weapon whistling as it cut the air. You have the spirit of a wolf, girl. Valerus said, his voice echoing from within his black helmet. But a wolf is no match for a hunter who has studied the geometry of death. Elara did not answer with words. She shifted her weight, her bare feet digging into the wet sand. She held the golden axe with a relaxed grip, her body low to the ground. To Valerus, she looked undisciplined. To Erik, watching from the gate, she looked like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Valerus moved first. He was surprisingly fast for a man in heavy plate. He lunged forward, the mace descending in a crushing vertical arc. Elara didn't block. She knew the impact would shatter her arms. She spun to the left, the mace slamming into the sand with enough force to send a spray of grit into the air. Before Valerus could recover, she swung the axe, the blade glancing off his shoulder pauldrons with a shower of sparks. Is that all? Valerus taunted, stepping back and resetting his stance. The duel became a dance of extremes. Valerus fought with the precision of a scholar, every thrust and parry calculated to exhaust his opponent. Elara fought with the unpredictability of the mist. She used the terrain, kicking sand into the general's visor and using the wreckage of the fallen siege tower to block his movements. The turning point came when Valerus reached into a pouch at his belt and threw a handful of southern dust, a blinding powder that ignited upon contact with the air. A flash of white light erupted between them. Erik cried out, fearing the worst. But Elara had lived in the blinding fogs of the mist for a decade. She didn't rely on her eyes. She relied on the sound of the wind and the shift of the sand. She heard the heavy clank of Valerus's boots as he charged through the smoke. Instead of retreating, she dove forward, rolling beneath his swing. As she emerged behind him, she swung the golden axe with every ounce of strength she possessed. The blade found the narrow gap in the armor at the back of his knee. Valerus roared in pain, dropping to one knee. Elara didn't hesitate. She brought the blunt pole of the axe down onto the side of his helmet. The general of the south collapsed into the tide, his black and gold armor filling with cold seawater. The invincible champion had fallen. A great cheer erupted from the walls of Kattegat, but Erik's heart did not lighten. He watched the southern fleet. According to the rules of the duel, the ships should have been raising their anchors. Instead, he saw the red lion banners being lowered and replaced with solid black flags, the signal for no quarter. "Elara, get back!" Erik screamed. From the flagship, a massive ballista fired. It wasn't aimed at the village, but at the beach where Elara stood over the fallen general. The heavy bolt hissed through the air, striking the sand yards from her. It didn't explode, it cracked open, releasing a thick, green gas that began to roll across the shore. "They don't care about their general." Eivor gasped from the wall. "They're going to kill everyone on that beach to take the axe. The king of the south doesn't want a treaty." Erik realized. He wants to erase the evidence of his crimes. As long as the charter and the heir exist, his claim to the north is a lie. The southern ships began a full bombardment. Boulders and firepots rained down on Kattegat. The village was becoming a death trap. Elara scrambled back toward the gate, dragging the heavy golden axe through the rising green mist. She reached the threshold just as Erik slammed the heavy timber beams shut. "We cannot stay here." Elara panted, her face pale from the toxic fumes. "If we stay, they will turn Kattegat into a graveyard by morning. We have to take the fight to them," Erik said, his eyes turning toward the small fishing skiffs hidden under the docks. "They think we're trapped, but they don't know the lion's roar." The lion's roar was a final secret within the golden axe that the charter had hinted at. When the silver ring was turned to a specific angle, the hollow handle of the axe could be used as a bellows. If filled with Bjorn's special incendiary powder, it became a short-range flamethrower, a masterpiece of southern engineering designed for ship-to-ship combat. "Bjorn, get the powder," Erik commanded. "Eivor, gather the best rowers. We're going to board their flagship under the cover of the smoke. If we take the king's representative, the fleet will scatter." They moved with the speed of ghosts, while the southern ships focused their fire on the Great Hall. Erik, Elara, and a dozen warriors slipped into the water. They used the wreckage of the siege towers as cover, swimming and rowing small, silent skiffs through the green fog. The southern sailors, confident in their superior firepower, never saw the shadows climbing their anchor chains. The southern flagship, the Regal Lion, was a monster of oak and iron. Erik was the first over the railing, his sword clearing the path for Elara and the others. The deck was a scene of frantic activity as sailors reloaded the massive ballistae. They were so focused on the village that they didn't notice the Northmen until Erik's steel was at their throats. "Secure the deck," Erik roared. As the battle broke out on the flagship, Elara headed for the captain's cabin. She knew the person directing this slaughter wasn't a soldier. It was the mind behind the silver ring. She kicked open the ornate doors to find a room filled with maps, silk hangings, and a single woman standing by a large window. It was Astrid. She had survived the mountain, though a long scar now ran down her elegant face. "You are persistent, little hunter," Astrid said, not turning around. "But you are fighting for a world that is already dead. The South is the future. Kattegat is just a footnote in a history book I am writing. Then I will be the ink that stains your hands." Elara replied, raising the golden axe. Astrid turned, a small, intricate crossbow in her hand. "The axe is a beautiful key, Elara. But did you know it's also a bomb? If you strike the wrong part of that handle with enough force, the powder inside will ignite. We'll all go up in a blaze of glory." Erik entered the cabin, his shield splintered but his spirit unbroken. "She's lying, Elara. She's trying to stall." The fleet is already turning. They saw the general fall, and they see the fire on this ship. Suddenly, the flagship lurched. One of the southern galleys, seeing the chaos on the command ship, had accidentally collided with them. The lantern on the table fell, igniting the maps and the silk tapestries. The cabin was instantly filled with fire. The charter! Astrid screamed, lunging for the document Elara had tucked into her belt. In the chaos of the fire and the tilting ship, Elara had a choice: kill the woman who destroyed her life, or save the document that proved her right to rule. She looked at Erik, who was fighting off 2 royal guards at the door. She looked at the golden axe, which glowed with the reflection of the growing inferno. With a cry of defiance, Elara grabbed Astrid by the collar and threw her toward the open window and the sea below. She didn't need to kill her. The sea would decide her fate. Elara then grabbed the charter and the golden axe, nodding to Erik. "The ship is lost." Erik shouted over the roar of the flames. "Jump!" They leapt from the burning flagship just as the lion's raw powder in the hold ignited. A massive explosion lit up the night sky, a pillar of gold and orange that could be seen for 50 miles. The southern fleet, seeing their command ship destroyed and their general captured, finally cut their lines and fled into the dark horizon.